So what we want to do is cultivate cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. Yes, unfortunately, the keynote is delayed. So welcome everyone to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is just for educational or entertainment purposes only. Yeah, so sorry, our keynote is actually pushed back. We're still working on it. So hopefully we'll have time for it in the next week or two. So today we're just going to be kind of chilling, hanging out with chat. How y'all doing? Neon Ansku, hello, first time here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yeah, so hopefully we'll have some fun today. Hopefully we'll learn something today. We've got a couple of subreddit posts that we can kind of go over. I think important topics for people in our community. There's actually a lot of good stuff to learn about. So we're thinking about that. First time watching, Elderflower says really like the YouTube. Well, we're happy to hear that. Welcome. And we see, I see Micah the Swede is asking, how do you decide what is valuable to do with your time? What a great question. So this is the tricky thing. Oftentimes it's in hindsight, right? So this is the really challenging thing, is that we don't really know ahead of time what is actually going to be worthwhile and what isn't. And furthermore, the most paralyzing thing about that is that we'll try really hard to figure out what is a good use of our time, and we'll spend so much time trying to figure that out that we won't act anyway. So by trying to figure out how to efficiently use our time, what we end up doing is wasting more time. And it's kind of tricky. So oftentimes, if you just think about stuff that you've learned, right? You don't know ahead of time what's going to be useful and what isn't. And it's a really common misnomer, and it's or a misconception, I should say. And so it's challenging, right? It's really tricky. But I think that's where I'd just encourage you to do more, and it's okay to be inefficient. And the other thing to kind of consider is that when you think about valuable, right? So valuable is not an objective thing. It's value is an intrinsic quality, right? So you can say, oh, well, clearly that's not true, Dr. K. Gold has a particular value, a dollar has a particular value. a Bitcoin has a particular value, and the value of a Bitcoin is fixed, right? It's subjective. You can rely on it. The value of a dollar is fixed. You can rely on it. It's going to be the same forever, right? So the interesting thing about value is that it's actually subjective, right? It's intrinsic. And so that's where you can even losing a game, for example, can still have value if you learn something useful. So a lot of what is valuable, it's not something you determine ahead of time. It's something that you pull out of the experience. And that's what's really challenging, is because unless you sort of realize that and internalize that, you're going to be looking for the most valuable activities and then end up sort of with this assumption that the value is intrinsic in the activity. And then what happens is when you engage in the activity, since you have an assumption of intrinsic value in the activity, you're not trying to extract what value you can out of it. So therefore, the value ends up being less. And as the value becomes less, the next time around, you're like, oh, that was a waste of my time. So the next time you're around, you're calculating more carefully, right? What is a good use of my time? I don't want to waste my time like I did last time. So let me be more careful. Let me be more selective. And thereby you just reinforce the bias. It's tricky. It's tricky. Good question, though. Shath is saying, I value you, Dr. K. I value you too, Shath. Thanks for responding. And the value of Luna? Oh, yeah. I see we have a donation from Frosted Sentry. Thank you very much for the $100 donation. We really appreciate it. All the donations this month go to support the Healthy Gamer Foundation, for which we are raising some money. So thank you very much. Yeah. So someone's asking a question about meditation. Jamie R. Official Music is asking, great resource for people. I have a question. Meditation is the danger of developing epilepsy justified, or is it really rare? I haven't seen too many papers about developing epilepsy from meditation. We'll see stuff like meditation-induced psychosis, sometimes things like meditation-induced mania, but that's not something that I'm too familiar with it. So, I mean, I don't know what you would mean by justified. I don't know what the odds are of developing developing epilepsy if you meditate. That's news to me. I'll look into it, though. If you're concerned, it's definitely a good idea to talk to your doctor, especially if you have a neurologist or something. Just ask them. Okay, should we dive in? Okay. Man, so many good questions. Have you experienced meditation-induced psychosis? I don't think so. I've had spiritual experiences in meditation, and that's also kind of a nuanced thing. What is a hallucination? What is a spiritual experience? What is psychosis? But I don't think my function has been drastically impaired through meditation in a way that persists and gets me into trouble or causes a significant amount of harm. So I'd say no. Thanks for the subs, everyone. Wow. AiryFun123 has subbed for 20 months. Thanks a lot for the Prime Gaming sub. Yeah, I recognize you, by the way. I think yeah. So welcome, and thanks for staying. Yeah, so someone's asking, what's the advantage of samadhi? What is the point of attaining samadhi in your opinion? So that's kind of an interesting question. So there are advantages to attaining samadhi, but I would say that the advantages are not the point, if that sort of makes sense. So as we attain samadhi, it's my belief, so this isn't something that we've really scientifically studied, because I don't know that we've scientifically rigorously studied states of consciousness like samadhi. I'm not even sure that we have scientific confirmation that something like samadhi is a discrete state that even exists. So here's what people will say about meditation, right? So we know that within 8 weeks of meditating, we know that within 8 minutes of meditating, you'll start to see some changes to your physiology. So it'll alter things like blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate. There's a sort of theory that 20 minutes of meditation is where we start to see a lot of benefits, because about 16 to 18 minutes of meditation is apparently what engages some physiological hormonal changes. So some studies, these are kind of like not great in quality, TBH, but will demonstrate reductions in cortisol at about 16 to 18 minutes of meditation. So people will sort of say, okay, like 20 minutes is kind of the sweet spot. And if you look at clinical trials, a lot of them will have around 20 minutes of practice. We also know that 8 weeks of meditation is when we start to see clinical benefits, right? So you'll see statistically significant reductions in depression and anxiety, sometimes things like pain scores and stuff like that, or actually not pain scores, quality of life, if we want to be specific. So you know that 8 weeks is when your brain starts to change a little bit. And then people will meditate for 8 months and they'll start to feel a lot better. Like, so this is where over time what happens is the benefits of meditation will extend beyond the practice. So the first time you meditate, you'll hopefully get some relief while you're meditating, but within a minute or two of stopping meditation, you're kind of back to where you were. After 8 weeks is when we start to see global changes to your day-to-day because of meditation. In 8 months is when people really start to change pretty drastically in terms of like starting to have like alterations in their worldview and stuff like that. And when you have people who meditate for years and years, they actually start to become different people. So people will like start to change their personality, right? So these are not just like neurotransmitter level changes, which is maybe what we start to see around 8 weeks. So like they start to become different people. They view the world differently. They start to like recognize what's important in life, and they let go of things that they used to think were important. And so it's my belief that samadhi is probably somewhat responsible for that change, as best as I can hypothesize. There really isn't data on that level of sophistication of meditation. And that's the tricky thing about the science of meditation, is that, you know, the how can I say this? The theory of meditation is very, very vast and deep. So like the system of meditation is like super vast and deep. You have tantra and you have mantras and you have all these different kinds of like samadhi and nirbij samadhi and bij samadhi and like all these different kinds of like states of consciousness that go like deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. We just don't know scientifically if like any of that stuff is legit. The interesting thing is that generally speaking, what science has studied well has been found to have some benefit, if not correlates with what sort of the theory kind of says. So, but the truth of the matter is we don't really know, because like we've probably studied like 1 to 2%, if even, probably less actually. So there have been scientific studies on, I would say, less than 1% of the meditative tradition. So that's where like samadhi, I think you'll start to see personality change and things like that over time. You'll start to view the world in a different way. But oddly enough, that's not why you should pursue samadhi. The main reason to pursue samadhi is to move towards enlightenment. Like, what is the point of obtaining a no-mind state? That I can answer more easily. So samadhi is not a no-mind state, first of all. The state of no mind is dhyana. This is all in Dr. K's guide, for those of you who are interested in a more complete explanation. So the purpose of a no-mind state is because sometimes your mind is not a fun place to be, right? Why do we because like sometimes our mind tortures us. Sometimes our mind controls us in ways that we don't want it to. And so what's the advantage of getting into a no-mind state? It's existing without mind. And once you exist without mind, then you begin to realize that you don't need to listen to mind, because that's what we tend to do. Oh, I want to eat a slice of pizza because my mind is telling me to. I don't want to go to school today because my mind is telling me to. These people don't like me because my mind tells me that's true. And so just spending time outside of mind, it's sort of like we all almost grow up in the cult of our mind, right? So we're just surrounded by our mind 24/7, all day, every day, sending us thoughts. And then we start believing that stuff, right? But much like, what's the advantage of like getting someone who's a cult member like outside of the cult for a little while? Like, what's the advantage of someone who's been surrounded by propaganda to, you know, get a differing perspective? The advantage is that it gives you like clarity and it gives you perspective. So the dhyan does the same thing. Thank you very much, Night Vision, for the donation. Night Vision's been a long time supporter of the stream. We appreciate it. Okay. What is the feeling of dhyan? Is it the ticklish feeling in the low brow? No, Jayberg. Dhyan is a state of consciousness. It's not a feeling. It's not a sensation. Those are two different things. So if you think about when you observe the tickling sensation in the eyebrow, you're still sort of like in a state of consciousness. So it's like, I think about dhyan as like sleeping, dreaming, wakefulness, and dhyan. Right? Yeah, so Krusty O saying dhyan is just blankness. I don't know how to explain it. Yep, so this is all in Dr. K's guide for those of y'all that are curious. But so, you know, this is where I'd say that it's existing without thoughts. So I don't know if y'all have ever been like really, really absorbed in something and just like completely kind of like at peace and enjoying like something. Like maybe you're, you know, smelling a flower, or you're laying on the beach and you're like kind of like not thinking about anything. Like I tend to think about, you know, water is like a big time that sort of facilitates dhyan-like states. And dissociation, I think, is actually the opposite of dhyan in a lot of ways. So in dissociation, you have an observation that is separated completely from whatever is going on, right? So like if I'm eating something and I dissociate from it, it's like I'm watching a film of myself eating. Dhyan is actually the opposite. It's when you merge with the thing. So it's actually complete opposites. No, so flow state is on the road to dhyan. Literally, there's like a whole lecture about this. About sort of the states of consciousness and how we sort of like understand what they are. Y'all should definitely check it out. Happy to answer questions, but this is exactly why we have the guide. So like there are a lot of people who will ask these questions. These questions are going to get asked again a month from now. So for the stuff that gets asked very, very commonly and that we sort of want to explain very comprehensively, like that's the stuff that we choose to include in the guide. Yeah, so Fairshea is saying same questions every stream, which is okay, right? So we're glad that new people are coming in. But that's where we have a challenge between balancing teaching advanced topics and then teaching the same stuff over and over and over again. And that's why we made the guide, so that people can essentially catch up. Okay? All right, let's jump to posts. Okay. So, let's start with this. I don't know how to be fun to hang out with. So, hi, Dr. K. I'm a 25-year-old male who is a NEET for many, many years. English is not my first language, so I'll do my best to express myself. Awesome. Right now, I'm in my second year of university. I'm meeting new people, and for the most part, I'm doing just fine. I've improved a lot through therapy and with some of your videos, like the one you did about having conversations. In this matter, I think I'm quite a good listener, and some people like to talk about deep stuff with me, but that's not enough. It might sound weird, but I feel like the more I improve as a person, the more dissatisfied I am with myself. It's not enough to have stopped being a NEET. It's not enough to make friends who trust in me to talk about their problems. No, I want more. I want to be funny and engaging, but I'm the opposite. The other day I was at a party and people there asked me many times, why are you so quiet? Don't be shy, stuff like that. I really wanted to connect with them and have a good time, but my mind went blank. I didn't really feel socially anxious or anything. It was just that nothing came to my mind. This happens to me a lot. I'm only worth for serious conversations. For the fun stuff, there are other people. I don't want to be like this. I want to make people laugh and enjoy myself with them. So really interesting post, right? So the first thing that I want to point out is that this is almost, in a sense, the exact opposite of other things that we've talked about, which is that we've had a lot of, people in our community who've said, I don't like small talk. I have trouble authentically connecting with people. I don't know if y'all have been here for a while, but y'all have seen that, like, sometimes we'll get these questions where, like, all I can do is, like, shallow stuff. I don't know how to form deeper connections. And so I think like this post, the first thing that I want to do is like, I want to acknowledge and applaud this person's effort, right? So who was a NEET for many, many years, but was a NEET, right? So this person is 25 years old and now they're in their second year of university, right? And they're doing just fine. So for those of you that are concerned that like you're going to be like this forever, the good news is that you don't have to be like that, right? So I've improved a lot through therapy and with some of your videos. Awesome. That's what we're here for. And that's what therapy is here for. So I think this is like really fantastic that this person is like doing better. The other thing is this person is learning. So they've watched some of our videos, and in some of our videos, what we do is we break down how to converse with people, right? So like people like who are struggling to form social relationships or like don't know how to make friends and stuff like that. We have a lot of stuff where we like talk through, okay, this is not just some like intrinsic skill. This is actually something that can be taught, just like how to cook, how to dance, how to speak, how to make music, how to play video games. Social interactions can be taught. You can understand and break down the formula of how to be socially adept. And it looks like this person has done a good job because they've sort of figured out some of the stuff that we sort of teach in terms of like how to be a good listener, right? And they're actually able to get people to open up to them and sort of discuss deep things. And at the same time, this person doesn't know how to just be fun. So they've sort of figured out how you sort of like, you know, have deep conversations, but they're not quite sure how to have fun. Like, how do I like just have fun conversations with people? Which is totally great. I'm glad you asked that question because we're going to teach you. Okay. So let's take a quick look at this scenario. Okay. So the first thing, let's sketch out, you know, the background of this case. Okay. We have a 25-year-old former NEET. Good job. Okay. So able to do deep conversations, is a good listener. But then they said a couple of other things. One is they sort of pointed out, and this is actually really, really good, right? So kind of other stuff to consider is that they never seem satisfied. Okay, so they I don't know if y'all kind of caught this, but they're asking about like how to communicate with people. And then there's this weird paragraph kind of in the middle that's like not about communication. It's about a lack of satisfaction within themselves. And we'll get to that in a second. So, and then we're going to kind of get to this, which is I really wanted to connect with them and have a good time, but my mind went blank. I didn't really feel socially anxious or anything. It was just that nothing came to my mind. I'm only worth it for serious conversations, okay? So we'll kind of go to this in the sentiment of only worth it for serious conversations. Now, this is where we're going to sort of point out a couple of things. If y'all have been like, you know, viewers of the stream and stuff like that, you're going to sort of recognize that this over here is probably a samskar, okay? And what we're probably like looking at here is that when I'm a 25-year-old male who's been a NEET for a long, long time, this is going to lead to feelings of like low self-worth. And if we look at some of these kinds of dialogue, right, like they believe they have low self-worth, right? So like I feel the more I improve as a person, the more dissatisfied I am with myself, which is really paradoxical, right? Because we would think that the more that you improve, the more satisfied with yourself you should become. So like, that's kind of weird. So there's like, that's the sign of a samskar. It's not enough. It's never enough. And why is that? It's because when you're 25 years old and you've been a NEET for a while, you need to make up for it, right? Because what you've got is you've got this like kind of seed of not being like a worthwhile person that you've watered and watered and watered and fertilized for many, many years. And now it's grown into a big plant. And that's going to be there. So you can start planting another seed of like positivity and like positive self-worth, but the old seed is going to be there. And so anytime people will ask you, why are you so quiet? Don't be shy. It's going to like activate that part of your mind that makes you think I'm not good enough, right? For so long, you have been telling yourself that you're not good enough or you should be more. And so when that happens for a long time, like this is going to persist. Okay. And then you're going to have these kinds of thoughts. Only worth it for deep conversations. And then if you keep going, what you'll sort of get to is even these kinds of thoughts where people only talk to me because they get something out of it. So the only reason they're my friend is because I'm the therapist friend. Right? And so now what we see is like the reason that this person is able to get here is because they socially improved, right? They learned, they watched some of our videos and stuff, went to therapy and all that good stuff, and now they like learned how to be good listeners. So they learned, things like reflective listening. They learned open-ended questions. I'd be curious if this person did group coaching, because this is what we tend to see in group coaching, is that people get really, really good at like having deep conversations and being like good at listening. So this is something that we sort of like, we'll try. So in order to facilitate understanding in group coaching, what we sort of have to do is teach people like, how do you listen? And like, how do you ask questions that sort of like dig deeper? And how do you sort of reflect on yourself? So these are the kinds of things, this is generally speaking what we tend to focus on, right? So this, I'm curious if this person did group coaching or if they just watch videos, either one is possible. But now what we're going to talk about is how do you have fun? And the good news is that there's actually a way to do this. So let's take a step back for a second and just think about this for a second, okay? So, how do you have fun interactions with people? So this is where, like, if we really think about the components of fun in an interaction, what does it kind of come down to? So the first thing that people may think is like shared interests, right? If I talk about video gaming and someone else talks about video gaming, we both like the same thing, that will be fun. But that's not necessarily the case, right? Because you can talk with people who also like the same game you like, but sometimes like it's actually a super toxic interaction where all y'all are doing is arguing. It's not necessarily fun. Like you can have two people who both like cake, and in fact they can both be pastry chefs, and even though their lives are very similar in a lot of ways, there's like a lot of clashing, right? So the first thing is that we assume that a lot of fun from an interaction starts before the interaction, if that kind of makes sense, right? So whether I have fun with someone depends on like all of these things before I even meet them. Like, what do we like? Do we have a shared background? Do we have a shared upbringing? Do we like the same stuff? Do we listen to the same music? That's what people think of as fun. Turns out that that's not really the case. So what we're going to sort of zero in on is like some actually like scientific principles of how to have fun interactions, okay? And what we're really going to focus on is one major thing. So the first thing is we may think shared interests. We may think shared background. But it's not really how it works. Because there can be people who are of your ethnicity, of your religion, who play the same games you do. And what you guys can do is like actually just drive each other crazy. So that's not it. So what is the fundamental nature of fun? So this is going to be kind of tricky, but we're going to have to do this. Oh, you guys can't see that. Whoops. Okay. So that's what I drew real quick. So I'll show y'all. So you're sitting there, you're watching Dr. K, right? Watching Dr. K. You ready for it? Y'all ready for it? So as I smile, right? What are you doing right now? What are you doing right now? Are you smiling too? Are we having fun yet, chat? Right? We're smiling, cringing, stop it. So this is very important to understand, like, how did we do that? What happened there? Right? So as soon as I stop and I go back into teaching mode, you start to feel calmer. Right? Body language. Okay, so this is where, if you want to have fun with someone, the most important thing that you need to understand is empathy. So this is how human beings work. Human beings are empathic. That's just how we are, right? So like I don't know if y'all have seen like these, these like prank videos where someone's walking down the street and like 50 people turn a corner and are running in the opposite direction. And the one person who has no idea what's going on, turns around and like runs in the same direction with the rest of the pack, right? So as human beings, we have like groupthink. We have like herd behavior. And that's because we have all these like empathic circuits. And so this is where when you go into an interaction and you're like, I'm going to try to have fun. I got to have fun. I got to have fun. What's going on up here? You're stressed out. As you stress out, what are you empathically projecting? You're empathically projecting stress. And what people will see is like what they'll sort of receive from you is stress. And then the whole tension in the room will rise. So y'all may know this because if you like know someone well, or you don't even have to know someone well, you can go into like a random room. And if someone comes in and they're pissed off, you can tell and it makes you uncomfortable. You don't even have to know them. You don't have to know their mannerisms. You can just tell. This person is like pissed off and I'm going to steer clear. It makes me tense, right? So the first thing to understand, if you want to have fun with people, you have to have fun yourself. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but like if you're trying to enter into interactions where like your goal is to like have fun with them, and this is where I want to tunnel down into some of this language because I think this is important to recognize, right? For fun stuff, there are other people. So this is where we've got to be really careful sometimes because when the way that this person is almost starting to think about interactions is that it's sort of like a one-way street where I am going to present something to the other person for them to have fun, right? So like I can be a good listener or I can be in fun mode. But I don't know how else to say this, but this feels very like one way to me. So like for fun stuff, if somebody else wants to have fun, they're not going to spend time with me. They're going to spend time with someone else. If someone wants to have a deep conversation, they're going to come to me and they're going to talk to me about it. But we're not seeing, we're not seeing this person in this interaction. We're not seeing like, what does this person get out of it, right? Do they enjoy it? What about their fun? Like I'm not seeing anything about that. It's not enough to make friends who trust in me to talk about their problems. No, I want to be funny, engaging, but I'm the opposite. And so that's where I'd say, like, this is where the first thing you should do is think about your own enjoyment in the conversation. So now what we're going to talk a little bit about is empathy. And this is where if you are having a good time, other people will enjoy your company. And I don't know if you guys, if y'all have seen this, but like, sometimes you'll like hear someone talking about something that they're super passionate about. And you don't even have to like what they're talking about, but just the fact that they're so passionate about it is like somewhat enjoyable, right? It's like you can even like watch someone, dancing or something like that, or even like eating food. And you can get some amount of enjoyment out of just watching someone else like really, really enjoying themselves. And that's because of empathy. So the first thing that you should do if you want to have fun with people is try to have a good time yourself. And this is where you're going to say, well, like in order for me to have a good time, I have to have fun. And in order for me to have a good time, like I need other people to enjoy my company. And like, it's like kind of a chicken or the egg sort of thing, right? Well, that's where I'd say you can actually steer the conversation in a couple of ways, right? So you can actually steer the conversation in things that you enjoy talking about. You can steer the conversation or the interaction in ways that kind of like make you excited. Like there are things that you can start talking about. You can shift the conversation towards things that you enjoy. So you could just, you have to be a little bit careful about this. We'll get to like part 2 in a second. But the first thing is because of empathic circuits in the brain, if you're having a good time, they're going to have a good time. And that's where if you're thinking, okay, in order for me to have a good time, I need them to have a good time, then think about what that projects empathically. I need you to have a good time. I'm stressed out about whether you're having a good time. And this is exactly the problem that people fall into is they're like, I'm trying to have fun, but I'm trying so hard to have fun that it ends up empathically sending signals of like stress and like trying really hard to like make something work. And then people kind of feel that tension. It's like, ha ha ha, let's have fun now. Look, we'll even try it here. I'm going to show you guys non-empathic laughter. You guys ready? Ha 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 ha. We're having so much fun. Look, I'm doing all of the things of having fun. Aren't we having fun together now, everybody? Ha ha. You see how hard I'm trying to have fun? Aren't we? Isn't it great? Ah, ah, ha 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 ha. Y'all see that? You see like how terrifying it is to empathically try to force people to have fun? Y'all get that? Like, seriously, do you get that? So this is where what you got to do is you just got to chill. You got to like take a step back, like within yourself and be like, all right, we're going to vibe with chat today. We're going to talk about a couple of things, right? We're going to like, I guess, be a little bit ridiculous. And now think about how you feel, right? Even as I sort of take a step back, I'm like, that was a little bit crazy. And now as I'm starting to have a better time, like I'm returning back to like lecturing mode, teaching mode, stuff like that, you start to chill out. So there's like that empathic connection. So that's where I'd recommend actually like steer the conversation towards something that you naturally enjoy talking about. Okay? So like as you steer the conversation in that way, like your tone of voice will change, your face will light up. And if your face lights up a little bit, like then you're going to be having a good time and someone else is going to be having a good time. So that's the first thing. Okay? So talk about things that you enjoy talking about. Steer the conversation and stuff that you're kind of interested in. But there's a problem with this, which is that if you're not careful, what's going to happen is you're going to like, if you overdo it, you're going to bore the other person. Okay? And so like, if I keep on talking about like, oh my God, like I love space turtles, dude, like space turtles are so awesome. I'm writing this awesome fan fiction about space turtles. And it's all about turtles from outer space, and they go into space and they come out of space, and they're turtles, and they've got 4 little legs and a tail, and we put like this little jetpack on the back of their shell, and then we've got, and you just keep going and going and going and going and going. So here's where the second bit of empathy comes in. So this is sort of what we're talking about here is going to be like projective empathy. So since human beings are empathic creatures, we can project something, and what we project, they're going to receive. And then I guess like the other kind of empathy that we're going to talking about is like a receptive empathy. So then what you've got to do is tune into the other person. So talk about something that you enjoy for like 60 to 90 seconds, right? And that's not where like the more you kind of time it, you're like, oh my God, like here we go, like 60, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're stressed out about it, just like share something that you're happy about. Share something that's like good in your day. Like, man, I had the best slice of pizza today. It was like amazing. Like, man, sometimes I just really love pizza. Then what you've got to do is tune into them and like see what they like, how they're gauging what you're doing. And then kind of tune into them and be like, okay, so like, you know, what kind of food do you like? Right? And then like sort of like punt things kind of back over to them. And so pay attention to how they respond. And what you're doing by sort of sharing this positive empathy, by sort of having this projective empathy that's like kind of like positive and upbeat and stuff like that, you're kind of opening the door for them to sort of give you the same, right? And they're like, yeah, dude, like I totally love pizza. Man, like what's your favorite pizza place? And then they ask you that question. Then y'all are kind of having a good time. And you're just kind of like vibing and stuff like that. You don't have to ask them deep personal questions about themselves. You don't have to listen. You can just sort of like, then you can kind of like go back to projecting. You can share, well, I had this awesome slice of pizza up in Chicago. But, you know, like I argue with my friend all the time about whether Chicago pizza is better or New York pizza is better. And then you pause and you kind of check in with them, right? So you stop talking so you can sort of use silence. These are your tools. So you can be quiet for a second and give them a chance to kind of volunteer. But that too, you want to be like a little bit careful there because you don't want to just be quiet, right? So you don't want to do this. You guys ready for the cringe again? Here we go. So I really like Chicago deep dish pizza, but my friend up in New York says that New York pizza is better. Right? So you want to be like, you want to give people an opportunity to jump into the conversation, but you don't want to like linger it too long. So what I would say is like, yeah, so you guys, it's the stare, right? It's not just the silence. It's the fact that my affect, you guys see what that does to you? Like my face is going to make you feel particular things. And the cool thing is like, it's not because my face is special. This is just how our brain is wired. Y'all get that? So you can like start to use some of these principles of sort of like projective empathy and receptive empathy, where you're kind of checking in with them, sort of like, okay, like is this person, like have I given this person a chance to talk yet? You know, maybe I should toss out a question. And the main thing is just like try to have fun with the person yourself. Don't worry about making them have a good time. Because when you're so concerned about them having a good time, then they're stressed out and you're stressed out because like that's empathically what you're projecting. And then then it feels like you're trying too hard, right? So a lot of times people get frustrated because there's all this kind of like useless advice that people don't know how to manage. So what are the pitfalls? Oh, you're having trouble dating? You're trying too hard. Just relax, right? Take it easy. This is what everyone tells you. And you're like, how do I do that? If I could do that, I would do that. These are the pitfalls. So what do? Okay, so the first thing is like project positivity empathically. And this is where like you don't want to pretend to be positive. You don't want to be sitting there and be like, okay, I gotta be positive, gotta be positive, gotta be positive. Ready? 3, 2, 1, smile. It's gonna terrify people. It's like, okay, so like, hey, I have 5 minutes with this person. This is what I want y'all to do. You take a step back. I'm gonna chat with this person for like 5 minutes. How am I gonna have fun in the next 5 minutes? What do I want to talk about? What's going on in my life that I could share? What's something that I could share that would genuinely make me happy? Right? And that's where you got to be like a little bit careful. So you don't want to do what I did when I was a freshman in college and I was talking to this girl and I was very excited because Warcraft 3 was coming out. And I proceeded to be very, very excited and bubbly and talk to her for 15 minutes about how Warcraft 3 was coming out. And then I told her, hey, by the way, I don't think I'm going to be able to hang out much over the next couple weeks because I'm going to be playing this game. And I never heard from her again. Right? So I I was completely not receptive to the empathic signals she was sending, which is like, this is kind of weird. Right? Would have been totally fine to be like, hey, like, I'm super excited because there's a game coming out. Like anything in particular you're looking forward to this semester. How's your semester going? Wow, that's awesome. Right? Or like, yeah, that really sucks. So then you can sort of like, but the key thing about having fun with someone is you can't, like, this is what I kind of summarize with, okay? You can't have fun with someone, or you can't make someone else have fun. The only way to really do it, or the best way to do it, is to have fun with them. That's the whole point, right? But this is where, like, the more that we struggle to try to have a good time, the more that we move out of having fun with someone and trying to, like, create fun for both of us. Which means that you just try too hard, which empathically sends the wrong signals. They pick up on your stress, and then interactions seem forced. Okay? And so this is the kind of thing where what we've got to do is just like try to have fun with someone. So that sort of involves like, how are you going to have fun with this interaction? What do you want to talk about that would be interesting? What's a topic of conversation that they could engage in that you would find interesting? Right? So that's all, like, you got to steer the conversation. And as you move the conversation towards something that you enjoy, you're going to be more relaxed over it. You're going to have a good time. Let yourself kind of flow into it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sort of like check in with them. So we're going to have some amount of receptive empathy, or we're going to like key in. So after 60 or 90 seconds, we're going to pause and sort of see like, okay, is this kind of interesting? And then even if you feel like you've talked too long, you can say, my bad, I got super excited about this just because I've been looking forward to it. What about you? Right? So at the end of the day, it's fantastic that people are learning how to communicate. And the funny thing is that what we tend to be doing is, it seems like we're like actually pretty good at teaching people how to have like deep connections with others. The problem is that having deep connections with others requires a skill set that's different from having fun with others. And if we talk a little bit about, okay, like, how do you have fun with people? We sort of assume that like people are just natural at it, which they may be. But the good news is that we actually know like how human beings enjoy each other's company. Like, we know what that sort of means. There's a certain amount of spontaneity to it. And the key thing that most people sort of lose track of is empathy. And the key thing there is that the more that you try to have fun, the more internally stressed you are. And the more internally stressed you are, the harder it's going to be for you to have fun, because you're going to be projecting that stress. And then sometimes what will happen is like, that's when people sort of feel desperate, right? That's when people feel like they're trying too hard. And if you're trying too hard, it's the very opposite of fun, which is like what's so tricky about it. Because people are like smart. Y'all are like really good at this stuff. You try to figure this stuff out. The challenge is that the more you try towards it, the harder it becomes. So the more that you understand like sort of how empathy works and sort of to project a certain kind of empathic signal, and also the more the open-minded you are to receive whatever signal they're sending, the closer you'll get it sort of like modulating and kind of like meeting kind of in the middle. And the more the more you're able to do that, the more y'all are vibing, right? Because that's what vibing means. We even have a term for it. When I'm on a wavelength and someone else is on the same wavelength, that's what we call vibing. So how do you vibe with people? Because that's what fun is, right? You vibe through like sort of projective empathy and kind of like receptive empathy. Okay? Questions? Yeah, vibing, right? Questions? So a NEET is someone who is not in employment, education, or training. Dozens of muffins. Strong work, mods. Lee does saying stream do be giving me hope to keep going today. Good. Keep going. So here's the thing to remember. If you have hope to keep going, the hope in and of itself has a actual effect, right? We tend to think about hope as something that's purely internal and doesn't affect outcomes. But the truth of the matter is that hope does affect outcomes. There are studies on this that have been done that when you have people who lack hope, they actually perform more poorly. And essentially when you give up is like, you know, winners don't quit and quitters don't win, right? So you got to hope. It'll actually influence your chances of success. Got it? Can you save a conversation if you find them boring? Sure. So that's where like I'd think a little bit about, you know, first of all, why you find them boring. Because if you have that kind of judgment in your mind, then it's going to be hard. So it's almost like the placebo effect or the nocebo effect. What you think about them is going to influence how you interpret what they say. So I'd say the biggest thing to save a conversation is actually to adjust your own judgment. So to acknowledge that like this is a human being. Just think about this for a second. This is a human being who has had their own experiences and like background and knowledge that they've learned, challenges that they've faced, struggles they've had, triumphs they've had. This is someone who's lived a whole separate life from yours. And so there's got to be like something novel, interesting, or something that you can learn from them. There's just no way. Like if it's a different gender, different race, like what's it like to be that person, right? Like what lessons is this person, what kind of content, what DLCs does this person have access to that I will never be able to play? And maybe you can like that's pretty cool, right? Like thinking about, okay, like what levels, what DLCs does this person have access to? Like tell me about which DLCs you have. Imagine if you're playing a game like Elden Ring, but like each person you meet has their own 5 unique DLCs. That you guys have a lot of shared content, but there's like unique content that you'll never be able to play, but it'd be like cool to hear about, right? So adjust, if you want to save a conversation, you know, I'd start by like thinking a little bit about your own perspective in the conversation. And then there's also like some stuff that you can sort of do, like you can sort of, you know, you can kind of like acknowledge that the conversation maybe seems hard or whatever. You can kind of go meta for a second. It's tricky, but I would start internally. So Cyber Dandy, sorry, is asking, Dr. K, why do you know all this stuff? Do they teach about fun in med school? No, they don't. So I know about this stuff from a combination of different places. One is that I've taken sort of the attitude that I just explained, which is that every person I meet, like, it's a whole different, they're like DLCs that they've got that I don't have access to. So when I tend to spend time with people, I try to really learn as much as I can from them. And you'd be amazed at like how much you can learn if you actually like try, like most of the day. Second thing is I just read a lot and like I listen to a lot of stuff. And then the third or fourth thing is, okay, so here's Dr. K's guide to like learning a bunch of random stuff. Okay. First thing, number one, understand that any person you meet is going to have access to information or knowledge or experience that you will never have. And so it's possible to like learn something substantial from every single person you meet. Number two, like I read a lot, generally speaking. So I read about 10 to 15 scientific papers a week. And this is where there's studies that show, so there's some studies on medicine. So back when I was like trying to be a good doctor, you know, there were studies that show like, okay, like which doctors do a good job and which doctors do less of a good job. And there's sort of this idea that the more experience you have, the better you are at something. This turns out to actually be one of the most critical misunderstandings that most people have. So the simplest way to understand this is I don't know what games y'all play, but chances are like in most MOBA games or FPS games, your rating, your matchmaking rating, your MMR, what rank you're at, tends to stay like relatively constant after the first 100 games. Right? So you'll have people who are like hard stuck in bronze for like 6 years. And so experience doesn't actually lead to improvement. And people have done studies on patient outcomes and found that this is true of doctors as well. That you can have a doctor with 30 years of experience or a doctor with 5 years of experience, and that the person with 5 years of experience is actually going to outperform the person with 30 years of experience. And furthermore, you can make predictions at 1 year out, 2 years out of which doctor will have better outcomes like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And essentially what it comes down to is how active of a learner you are. So some people will just mindlessly grind and they won't get better. And other people will actively, continually try to learn. And the people who actively try to learn are the ones that end up learning more. Big surprise. So once I sort of realized that, I realized that like no amount of training behind me is enough, right? Like I can go to med school, I can study to become a monk, I can do all these different kinds of things. But the second I stop trying to learn is the second I plateau. So I just read a fair amount, right? So I'll read books and stuff like that. I read a lot of scientific papers. I personally like to read scientific papers because I find that most books that summarize information will have a lot of like biases or conclusions or things like that. Essentially, it's expert opinion, but it's one person's opinion as opposed to the actual evidence. And there are all kinds of different things that, you know, once you dig into the evidence, you'll be able to like get closest to like reality. And then you'll sort of like, you can form your own conclusions. So that's the second thing. Third thing is that so I did study for many years to become a monk. And what I really realized is that there's a way to analyze your own experience, which leads to a lot of like learning. So instead of just, you know, taking things at face value, that there are all kinds of different things that I can analyze. Like, so this is what I sort of discovered. This almost is more from the yogic side, but what I really discovered from like all the, you know, the monk training is that each aspect of human experience can be like broken down and understood, which is sort of what science says. But the problem is that science looks at piles of people instead of an individual, right? So science will look at like, for example, you know, which major correlates with like what median income, which is a fair thing to say. But remember that there's a lot of individual variance between majors, right? So like if I decide to study computer programming, I may make more money on average than someone who studies creative writing. But the truth of the matter is that there are a lot of people out there who study creative writing who make way more money than developers do. And so you have to be careful about basing your life on averages as opposed to your own personal experience. And that's where you just have to sort of like learn from your own experience. So what I sort of did, for example, for this kind of talk, is many years ago, I decided to set out with the goal of like making friends. And what I'm going to do is like use my meditative training every time I'm in a social interaction. I'm going to pay attention to what's going on. I'm going to pay attention to myself. I'm going to pay attention to like how I feel. I'm going to use my powers of observation to sort of like pay attention to other people. And then like the more that I interact, the more that I'm self-reflective. Even recently, like I sent, I recently had a text exchange with a very good friend of mine about like in which I sort of gained some awareness of like how I was sort of mistreating them, how I was being judgmental towards them. I wasn't like mistreating them, but I recognized that within my own mind, I was making judgments that despite my politeness were not authentic, right? So like, because I was being polite instead of, and then what I realized is like, oh, the judgment within me is wrong. So you can sort of like study yourself. And I think if you do these three things, then you'll like learn a ton. Yeah, Scallon is asking a question, how do we apply this in large groups? I find the dynamics to be different. The dynamics are very different. For sure. Okay, I got to scroll down because I realize I've been monologuing for a bit. Yeah, so Boba Balls is saying, yes, I just gave it the cashier at the grocery store a genuine compliment, even though my mind tried to trick me out of it. Beautifully done, right? That's what we should be doing. So recognize that your mind is going to try to trick you, right? It's going to say all these kinds of things like, oh, it doesn't matter, or you're going to feel embarrassed. Don't do that. But that's where in that moment, you have an opportunity to act and you can say something that could enrich someone else's day. So say it. And even if it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Is it possible to have conversations when you seem to be the only one that doesn't have a lot of shared interests compared to those around you? 100%. I would even go as far as saying that's when it's the easiest to have conversations. So here's the thing. If y'all want to have conversations with people who share interests and you don't, really simple way to do it. In fact, this is the easiest conversation to have. And the reason for that is if you think about it, if you share an interest with someone, the conversation is going to be specific to the interest. What kind of Pokemon do you like? This is what kind of Pokemon I like. How do you like to evolve your Pokemon? Where do you catch this Pokemon? Oh, this is my favorite Pokemon. Which was the first Pokemon which one did you pick? Did you pick Bulbasaur, right? You can talk a lot of specifics about the particular thing. But the cool thing is there's one script or one major script for all the conversations that you have no interest in. That script is very simple. It's this. So I'm not really like, I don't have much experience with Pokemon. Can you tell me what you like about it? Explain it to me. That's it. Right? So then they start talking, be like, if there's something you don't understand, your goal in the conversation is try to understand what they're talking about. What is a Pokemon? You catch them? Like, how does that work? Are y'all like animal control? You use a Pokeball? What's a Pokeball? And a very, very good way to practice this kind of conversation is to talk to a kid. Because like the kid is going to know some random crap that you've never heard of. Right? And you just be like, what is this child talking about? So you can just like ask, like try to understand. This kind of goes back to the DLC thing where like this person has a whole set of experience, right? So in 1 hour of talking with this person, you can learn so much about this topic. And just ask them questions about it. Be like, that's interesting. And whatever you genuinely find interesting about it is what you should ask about. And then at some point you may want to kind of volunteer like certain perspectives of your own and stuff like that to be like, so like I see you're in Pokemon. Like I really like, I see that there's also like card games and video games. Like I'm a huge fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! Have you ever played like Yu-Gi-Oh? You should really check it out. Here's what I like about it. Blah, 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 blah. Does that sound familiar to you? Is that what Pokemon is like? And then you can just like have a conversation about it. You don't need to share interests. This is the biggest misnomer that people have. In fact, I find it actually easier to have stimulating conversations with people who I don't share interests with. And then you just learn about it. Hoskins, thank you very much for the $500 donation. Thanks for everything you guys do. You're most welcome, my friend. We will use that money to enrich our community. So thank you. PogChamp. Okay. Shall we move on? Good questions. I guess we're talking about how to socialize today. Dr. K teaches the internet how to talk to people. Okay. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you all a choice. Okay? Let me see if I can set up a poll. We're going to give you all poll. Seriously, y'all, thanks for the financial support. We really do appreciate it. Okay. New poll. Okay, we've got 5 options. All right, chat. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go here, and I'm going to show y'all. Okay, so these are our options. Okay. Number 1 is I can't go on in this sub. Oh, man. So this is going to be about sort of like how the internet evolves, and we're going to learn a little bit about our mind as well. So like how it's going to be kind of weird. Sort of like mildly incel. So we're going to talk a little bit. This is also about social interactions. We're going to teach a little bit about that. This is going to be critical inner voice. So this is a case about a kid from a South Asian nation who is struggling to has internalized the voices of their parents and has a lot of expectations and stuff like that. Content and delusions. Right? So I'd rather be content in my delusions than depressed in reality. And then this is a meme post. I often spend hours grinding away at a game for little to no reward, but the minute I have to do actual work, everything starts to suck. So grinding in game versus RL. Okay, so why don't we vote, and then we probably have time for 2. Content does not meet guidelines. Oh, maybe because it says incel. Interesting. It would not let me post something that has incel. That's so interesting. Okay, let's see. Wait, hold on. What do? Okay, so critical inner voice and grinding in game versus real life. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, all right? Okay, so let's talk about... Great, so we'll talk about these 2. Okay, thank you for voting, everyone. So here's the crux of it. I often spend hours grinding away at a game for little to no reward, but the minute I have to do actual work, everything starts to suck. So working for 30 minutes feels bad, man, and grinding in a game for 8 hours for slightly cooler helmets. So how on earth does this work, right? Why is it that so we recognize that when we recognize that when we grind for something in a game, it doesn't actually have real value, right? We know that. It's hey, this helmet is different, or I get this kind of trophy. And this helmet is a virtual item in a virtual world. And let's assume for a moment we're not even getting bogged down in real world economies and auctioning it off for real money or any of that stuff. Let's just assume that that's not even a part of it. And yet, when I grind for 30 minutes in real life, that actually has a real benefit. And so you would think that obviously, since one thing means more, in the real world, since one thing has real benefit and something has no benefit, why is it that why is it that I can game for 8 hours, but I can't grind for 30 minutes in real life? So there are a couple of different things to understand here, okay? The first is going to be something about game development. So we're going to actually talk about video games for a second and how they're developed and what developers do. Second thing we're going to talk about is a little bit about like neuroscience and how that kind of works. And then hopefully we'll come to some kind of conclusion about what to do about this. So I went to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco a few months ago, and it was a fantastic conference. I really enjoyed being there. I talked to a bunch of game developers, offered my own thoughts about I was invited to speak about creating positivity and stuff. But I sort of figured out like a couple of things that I had never really understood before. So I got one interesting question. So someone asked me, just to give you all some context. So I was there speaking about the psychology of positive gaming. So how can you create a community that's like positive in some way? And so someone asked me a question. Actually, let me give you all more context. Sorry. So my general answer was that most of the attempts to create positivity within gaming seem to be tacked on. Okay. And so what do I mean by that? That means that if you look at the way that a game is designed, they design the game, right? So they like make the game and they're like, by the way, we need a positive community. So let's like implement some features. So they add like a reporting system, or they add like a cheering system, or they add some system on at the end, because someone up there with an MBA is like, hey, everyone's into positivity in gaming right now. Like, developers, make some positivity feature. Like, let's make the game positive. And that's when, like, you as a developer, you go to the person, like, you go to the person who's telling you to build this feature, and you're kind of like, well, like, we can build something, but the truth is, we probably need to think about this bigger, and like, we may need to rewrite some code. And they're like, no rewriting code. That's too expensive. Forget about doing this from the ground up. This is the 6th iteration of the game that we're making. All the code is already built. Just tack something on. Just tack it on. We got to implement some positivity. Let's do it. And so the positivity in the game is like not a core feature of the game, right? It's like something that gets tacked on. So like, I think actually Dota does a good job of this, but let's just use Dota as an example. So you like play the game of Dota, and then afterward you can commend someone or report someone. But it's not part of what they call the game loop, okay? And this is really important to understand. So someone asked me the question when I was at the conference: how do we incorporate positivity into our core game loop? And then there I am asking, I was like, okay, that's interesting. I have no idea what words you just used. Can you explain to me what the core game loop is? And so this is where, like, this is the crux of like video game development. So especially if you guys look at mobile games, you'll understand this very well. What is the basic activity that you do from minute to minute, or like for a set of minutes within a particular game? That's the core game loop. And what's essentially done is like that process is optimized, okay? They optimize that process so that you have the most engagement, and you will continue to engage in that loop over and over and over and over and over again. Here's the key thing. The reward in the video game is not part of the core game loop. Do y'all get that? This is what's so damn confusing, because you're like, I don't understand why I'm playing for 8 hours for this colored helmet. You're not playing for 8 hours for the colored helmet. The colored helmet is not actually part of the game. It just happens at the end. The reason for the colored helmet is to get you to queue up into the core game loop again. So all really the helmet does is it causes you to like enter the path. And most of your time is spent in the path. So this is the way to kind of think about it. How much time do you spend queuing up versus playing the game? And when you're actually playing the game, you're not thinking about the helmet. When do you actually think about the helmet? You think about the helmet when you finish a game and the game shows you your progress bar. You have 2 out of 5 stars. And once you get all 5 stars, once you get 5 wins for the day, you get the colored helmet. We have 2 stars. So when does the helmet enter your psychology? It enters when you click play. But you're not playing for 8 hours for the helmet. The only time you're playing for the helmet is when you click the play button. And then you enter the core game loop and you lose an hour, because that core game loop is designed with so much sophistication that you're going to lose a whole hour. Hands down. Right? There's going to be whatever it is. And you'll see this a lot in mobile games where, like, if you think about the level design for all these, like, different games where you bust stuff, right? Like, you're like popping things and popping, I don't even know what to call it. Like all these games where you like slide your finger across stuff and you like break crap. Yeah, like Fruit Ninja or whatever, right? Like whatever, like if you think about that, like what's the core game loop there? Like once you enter, it's kind of like you board a train and the only time to disembark is at the station. You're stuck. You don't stop in the middle. And these core game loops are designed with a lot of sophistication. So people figure out like what's the right amount of squishiness to add? What's the right amount of color? What's the right amount of like feedback? Right? When you act within the game, you'll see a burst of color. You'll hear a satisfying sound. You'll even have vibration, which I personally find hella annoying in controllers. You'll get all this feedback that keeps you ensconced within this game loop. And so the reason that you spend 8 hours is not for the colored helmet. It's because of the sophistication of the game loop. And what do I mean by sophisticated? Over the last 30 years, developers have figured out which game loop keeps you the most engaged. They figured out what level of color saturation do you need? How much sound, how much music, what kind of music do you need? How often do we need to update the terrain so your brain does not get bored of seeing the same old thing over and over and over again? How often do we need to release patches so that people get interested in the game and they'll engage in the core game loop again? Right? So even things like balance patches, people want to mix it up, right? Why do they want to mix it up? They want to mix it up so that it stays fresh. And if it stays fresh, you're going to enter the game loop over and over and over again. So even if you look at these like, these mobile games where you're kind of like doing, one level and then the next level and the next level and the next level, they're like 600 levels. But every 42 levels, there's a new mechanic, right? There's like something else. You have to pop it twice. You have to slash it twice. It explodes. And then they give you different like bomb things that you can pop and this thing that you can pop. They make like modifications so that you can play this stupid game hour after hour after hour after hour and you never get bored. And here's the thing here's where the colored helmet comes in. Because what are the game developers worried about? Once you're in the game loop, they've got you. Once you queue up for a game of Dota, you're stuck in a game of Dota. If you disconnect, you're going to get reported, right? So they've got you in the game loop. So when do the developers lose you? Between game loops, right? So when I am done with this round and I'm bored of playing the game, what I'm going to do is switch to another game. And then someone realized, oh my God, people will play 2 rounds of our game and they'll get really, really frustrated with it. But if we make them play 5 games and we give them a colored helmet, they won't switch between game loops. That's where the colored helmet comes in. Okay? Now, the next thing to think about is like this question. Remember, if we go back to the original question, does that make sense, people? So, working for 30 minutes. Now, here's the problem. So what I want you all to think about is what is the equivalent of the core game loop for this? So if I sit down to study for my algebra test or my pre-calculus test, what is a 5-minute experience of that like? Torture. Pure torture. In fact, it is the very opposite of the game loop, because the second I start studying, all I want to do is enter the core game loop that is going to be like, makes me lose an hour. Do y'all get that? So that it's sort of like, it's not a false equivalency, but the focus, what keeps the difference between these experiences, sorry, I got to find my words. The difference between these experiences has nothing to do with the reward at the end, because we've already established that the reward at the end should lead to the opposite behavior. I should be studying a lot more and playing a lot less, because the helmet doesn't matter, whereas an A actually matters. So what explains the behavior? It's not the reward. It's actually the core experience of the activity. So studying calculus for 5 minutes is friggin' boring. And even though an A is worth more to me on a test than, some colored helmet in a game that I'm not even going to play for 6 months from now, like, I can't grind in real life. And that's because the activity, the actual gameplay of real life is not rewarding at all. There's no squishiness. There's no sounds. Like whenever you get an algebra problem right, whenever you solve a calculus problem right. There's no reward. There's not like a flop, ding ding, and a star. There's nothing. Nothing on the dude. My textbook doesn't even change color. Like, what the hell? The page doesn't even turn itself. Right? Like, I don't even get any stars when I get an algebra problem right. Like, what is this boomer stuff? I gotta turn the page myself? I have to pick which problem. You go to the back where you've got your 16 problems. There's like 16. It's like a pile of random problems. That's not how it works in a game. In a game, they give you one and it's flicking. Bing, 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 bing. And you click it. Let's go, next level. And then you see boop, bing, 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 click it. And what? I'm just supposed to look at this algebra textbook and just do one friggin' boring problem after another boring problem? And the second I get it right, whether I get it right or I get it wrong, there's no differential in reward? I don't even know if I got it right or wrong. Like, why am I even doing this friggin' algebra problem? Like, I don't even know if it's right or wrong. What are you telling me? You're telling me that I have to flip to the back of the book and look up the answer? And what the hell is this crap? Only the odd number questions have answers? Half the answers are even missing. Where's the DLC? Where do I pay the extra money for that? Y'all get this? So the grind in real life is not optimized to be fun. Now, here's where the neuroscience comes in. And it's short. I mean, it's complicated. We could talk for years about it if you wanted to. But here's the thing. There are parts of your brain that can't tell the difference. Okay? So we have the cortical centers of our brain. Our cerebral cortex is what makes us human. It gives us, the sense of identity. And it gives us actually, even partially, even that. It doesn't even give us that. That's parts of our primitive brain. It gives us higher order thinking and higher order functions and all this kind of stuff. And then we've got our primitive parts of the brain that are like, ooh, shiny. Ooh, color. If you see a piece of jewelry and it looks vivid and colorful, you're like, wow. We as human beings universally revere certain kinds of objects. Stuff that's shiny. We're like friggin' magpies. So if you have a sparkly something, your eyes are gonna look at it, right? This is primitive crap. We like particular things. We like things that are colorful and a little bit squishy, right? So if you play games all this chibi stuff and jelly splash and there's a certain, that we just like. Right? We think babies are cuddly. We think babies from all species of animals, cute baby deer, cute baby kitty, cute baby puppy. We're attracted, it's a primitive thing. And now what the video game does is it activates all that crap. It takes advantage of all that crap. And if you look at the font in your algebra textbook, it's not a chibi font. It's Times New Roman, which is we're not into that. And so the tricky thing is that, the higher order functions of our brain that tell us, oh yeah, an A is worth more to you than a colored helmet. That's true. But on the deeper order functions of the brain, the stuff that regulates hunger and thirst and that kind of stuff, a basic sense of enjoyment and attraction to color and the parts of our brain that's more like a bot. Those things can't tell the difference between the two. So the higher order value that we apply, the abstract value that we applied to a grade versus a colored helmet, that may be able to tell the difference, but the deeper parts of our brain can't tell the difference. So success in a video game activates, this is not a real circuit, it's just something, it's an emergent phenomenon. So, many years ago, I gave this lecture on this thing called the triumph circuit, which goes to, there's science there, but it's basically this idea that we have this human, some psychologists came up with this concept called intent to mastery. And what they were looking at, they made a really interesting observation, which is that kids drop things all the time, but they never get fed up of dropping things. So if you take a 6-month-old that literally cannot hold stuff, right? They'll try to pick it up and they just keep dropping it. And an adult will get frustrated after trying something over and over and over again and not succeeding, will give up. But kids who can't do stuff like walk, like the kid can't walk, but they keep trying. They'll fall 50 times, 60 times. And mind you, they're falling 100 times and they'll keep trying until they get it right. What on earth is going on? And what they discovered is this is part of our brain or psychology that they call intent to mastery. That all human beings have an intrinsic drive to master something that's difficult. Now, what happens, this is why kids learn how to walk, okay, in short. What happens with video games is they tap into this primal sense of intent to mastery more so than the abstract goals that we have in real life. So our algebra textbook does not tap into intent to mastery the way that video games do. And this is what I kind of call the triumph circuit. We basically got this part of our brain that values triumph. So what we value in human society is adversity followed by victory. The person that we celebrate the most is the one who struggled and then was successful. Not the person who was handed everything on a silver platter and then they I'm a billionaire today. And my path to success was I started a business. I inherited $2 billion from my parents and I started a business. And today I'm worth $1 billion. Go me. That's not what we celebrate, right? What we celebrate is the person who rises through adversity. And so then we look at even games like From Software, I think is the best example of this, or Cuphead or whatever. And the games that we enjoy playing are the ones that are challenging. This is why video game developers have figured this out. That why do we even have matchmaking? Why do we pair people up? It's because challenge followed by triumph is what we enjoy the most. But where's the challenge and triumph in my algebra textbook compared to something like playing a game of Dota? So this is what happens. This is why why is this so accurate? Because game developers have figured out, I don't even know that they did research, but I think this happens organically. It happens kind of like evolution, where someone creates a game and then they add a feature and then that game gets really, really big. And then a bunch of games add that feature because they're like, oh, people like this feature. So a good example of this is also if you look at, games are Souls-like now, right? What does that mean? That means that when you die, you drop your XP there, which is a terrible feature. I don't know if you guys remember, but I remember when I first started playing Dark Souls, I was so infuriated by this feature. What do you mean I lose my XP? This is BS. F this. And now half the games you make do it. This is what happens. They figure out that XP feels so much more to you in your primitive friggin' brain. That which we can lose and we don't take for granted means more to us. And that's a feature of human psychology, right? We value that which we can lose. And Miyazaki figured that out. And now you see a bunch of people doing the same damn thing. Do y'all get that? So why does it feel so real? Because it is. Because game developers are figuring out, and I don't think this is nefarious. I don't think it's necessarily malicious. There are people out there who are malicious. But I think this is just someone I don't think Miyazaki is out there trying to take advantage of our neuropsychology. I think he's out there trying to create a truly intensive and triumphant gaming experience, which I think he does. That's what they're going by, right? So most game developers, at least the ones I've worked with, will try to make the game that they themselves wanted to play. They're like, I would love to play a game that ... But if you even think about it, where does that love for a video game come from? It comes from, I've played this game that scratches these 5 neuroscientific itches, but is missing this itch and this itch. So I'm going to make a game that includes these 5 things and tacks on this. And tacks on a community element. And tacks on some kind of progression. And tacks on this. And so over time, this is what's happening. Games are getting more and more engaging. 3 years ago, just to summarize, 3 years ago, I went to the American Psychiatric Association and I said, hey, I think video game addiction is a huge problem. I think we should take this stuff more seriously. The response that I got was nice. They said, it sounds like you're really onto something, but we don't have the bandwidth because we have an opiate crisis here in this country, and that's where all of our energy is. That year, I submitted an abstract to present at the national conference, and the abstract was declined because they had more important things to worry about. So this year, we presented something at the APA conference, but more interesting, there were 4 sessions that I could see that were related to video game addiction this year. So this problem is getting worse. About 10 or 12 years ago, about 6% of people worldwide were addicted to video games. 6% of people 10 years ago. Now the number is closer to 11%. So this is getting worse. And like, that's because the games are getting better, right? And the better the games get, the more true this becomes. So be careful. So Coffin Rock 15 is saying BS games are crap now. Yes, they are. You are correct. So this funny thing is that I actually agree with that. And more people are playing them. And why is that? Why are games getting worse and more people playing them? Total amount of time played is increasing. Why is that? It's because people are figuring out how to scratch your itch, your neuroscientific itch. And it's not about creating a brilliant game anymore. It's not about creating a game that is based on making it as fun as possible. It's about creating games that are geared towards engagement, towards playtime, right? So you're right that games are in some ways getting worse and they're getting more addictive. And Half Bunny's saying it's exhausting. You're damn right. But boy, do you got to keep playing. Sleepy with this 108 is saying 7,000 hours in Dota, still need more. Yep. Frustrating but rewarding. Just like life is supposed to be. 789. Frustrating but rewarding. Right? Because that's what our brain loves. Make it too easy and it's boring. Make it too hard and it's overwhelming. Where is it? Right in the middle. Because when it's right in the middle, when you achieve something in it, you feel good about yourself, right? You're like, yeah, take that, Melania Blade of Mikola. Yes. And what difference does it make? None whatsoever. But your brain can't tell the friggin' difference. You guys get it? So what can we do to grind better IRL? What a fantastic question. So I guess we can go ahead and do announcements now. So here's the thing. We're making a new guide. Okay? So we're making Dr. K's guide to ADHD and doing stuff. And I know it's kind of weird, but the guide involves 2 things. It involves information about ADHD, but we were trying to figure out, like, what do we call this guide? Because it has all kinds of weird stuff. Like, it's got stuff on motivation on there. It's got stuff about pratyahara on there, which you guys may not even know what that is. So we teach all this stuff. And what it is it's like the guide to doing stuff. So basically, I sat down and I was like, everyone is like struggling with motivation. But what it really is, it's not just motivation, because motivation is just one piece of it. Like, we don't know how to do stuff anymore. We can't bring ourselves to, like, study. We can't bring ourselves to do things like exercise when we know it's good for us. Like, we've lost the ability to just, like, do stuff, right? We're getting trapped by, like, apps and notifications and loot boxes and all this crap. So we were trying to figure out, like, what do we call this thing? And so, like, it's my guide to doing stuff. And ADHD, because attention has a lot to do with it. And so that's what we teach. right? So like this is where like just to give you guys kind of a preview of like what we talk about. So for example, when we want to do something, we think about it a lot, right? Like, oh, I want to play this game. I want to play this game. I want to play this game. You're thinking about it, thinking about it, thinking about it. I want to eat this food. I want to eat this food. I want to eat this food. The amount of time you spend thinking about something correlates with the amount of your eventual, like how likely you are to do it or not do it. So everyone talks about behavior. Everyone talks about motivation. How do I exercise every day? No one talks about what populates my mind, right? So imagine what your life would be like if you thought about exercise all the time. I can tell you that wouldn't be good either. You'd probably end up with body dysmorphic disorder and you would be a bodybuilder. And you'd think that's yay, but it's actually a very challenging experience for those people too. So like no one teaches, look, we don't teach this stuff, which is pretty basic, which is what determines the thoughts in your head. Where do the thoughts in your head come from? And furthermore, how do I control the thoughts in my head? Because what I do depends on what I think about. Earlier today, we had someone who said, I gave the cashier a compliment even though my mind told me not to. So how do you control, like on a fundamental level, what your mind tells you to do? So that's where like we introduce this technique called pratyahara. Pratyahara is sensory withdrawal. So a couple thousand years ago, there was a guy named Krishna who's revered as a Hindu deity. Chances are historically was a real person. And chances are probably taught this stuff legitimately. Whether he's God or not, you guys can debate that as much as you want to. He had some good stuff to teach. So what he said is that our sense organs are like 5 horses that are pulling a chariot. And like, if you want to succeed in life, you've got to get all 5 of those horses running together. But if they're each running their own way and you're not in control, you don't get to control where your chariot goes. So how do you control your mind? How do you actually go to doing stuff? So we teach certain meditation techniques that are all designed to focus on you being able to do stuff. And I'm not going to call it quite motivation because it's more than motivation. Motivation is the intrinsic desire towards something. But what we're actually talking about is where does that intrinsic desire come from? How can you cultivate particular kinds of thoughts? There's other stuff in there too, like resistance. So this is just like another broad concept that like sometimes you want to do something, but when you go to do it, something gets in the way. And like, I don't know how to say this, but it's like, it's that simple, right? It's like, I want to eat healthy, but when I like go up to the counter and I'm ordering food, I don't order a salad. I order a burger and fries. Like, how does that work? What is the, like, so there's this thing called resistance. And what are the components of resistance? Is it a samskar? Is it an emotion? You know, what's going on there? So there's a lot of stuff about the guide to doing stuff. And ADHD, right? So we're going to cover some clinical stuff there too. It's not a substitute for clinical treatment by any means. It's just educating people on ADHD. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like people have all kinds of questions about ADHD. What's the relationship between ADHD and addiction? What's the relationship between ADHD and depression? How does ADHD work? What's going on in the brain of ADHD? How does ADHD medication work? It's basically the stuff that like, sometimes when I have a patient who comes in with ADHD, I teach them certain things about the illness. It has nothing to do with their diagnosis. It has nothing to do with their treatment. It's just like, here's the stuff I explain to everyone. If someone says, okay, what are the medication options? I'll give them just like a general overview. And then as we apply it to the specifics of a person, that's when it becomes medical advice. So we're going to teach some basics around that. Like how does ADHD work? And even from kind of the yogic or meditative perspective. So we're working on that. So it's got just a bunch of stuff about like doing stuff, basically. Like what are the components of like doing stuff? In the same way that today that we broke down, like what are the components of like having a conversation, because that can be taught. And the reason, honestly, the reason I think everyone's struggling, everyone's on the struggle bus is because we give people information about stuff, right? We'll teach you about how the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. We'll teach you about like history. And we'll teach you about how batteries are made. And we'll teach you about politics. And we'll teach you about programming. But we never teach people like how you work. Where do the thoughts in your head come from? What determines whether you listen to a thought or you don't listen to a thought? How do you select for certain kinds of thoughts? How do you take action? Just something that simple. How does a human being take action? What are the components that go into action? Where does motivation come from? What is the role of motivation? What is the role of discipline? What is the role of willpower? How do you cultivate those things? Should you rely on willpower? Should you rely on discipline? Winning Willie 88 says, will you play Valorant today? What a great question. What goes into that? So that's what we're trying to teach here. A couple of just updates about this. So one is that we're in production for the rest of the week. So we're going to be out for stream. Hopefully we'll have a trailer coming for y'all soon. And if you own the guide already, you get a discount, by the way, if you guys want to get this other guide. And it's available for pre-order, is the last thing. Yeah, so this is where, like, you know, like, I really think this can be taught, right? So, like, I used to, you know, play video games all day. And, like, I couldn't bring myself. Like, I was so damn frustrated with myself. Because I would, like, wake up some days and I'd go to class and I'd sleep through class other days. And I did not understand why. I did not understand why I could do it on some days and not do it on other days. I was so damn frustrated with myself for lack of consistency. Like, no follow through, no consistency. And that's because no one ever taught me. Like, no one ever told me until I went to India. And then what did I discover there? People were like, oh, by the way, this is how your mind works. This is how behavior works. This is how desires work. This is how all this crap works. This is where the thoughts in your mind come from. This is what a samskar is. This is why every time you can talk to these 10 people totally fine, but anytime you go to a party, your mind blanks out. You can talk with people in small settings, you can talk with people online, but anytime you're at a party, your mind blanks out, and this is why. No one ever explains to you how you work. So we, in our own way, I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm not saying it's brilliant, right? I think it's pretty good. It worked for me, seems to have worked for a lot of people that we've been able to teach it to. We're going to share our own perspective on doing stuff. So Dr. K's Guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff. So KNG Knight is saying, I want to go to India now. I think that's a great idea, but here's the other thing. So I came back from India, right? And what I realized is as part of my dharma, duty, to share with y'all what little I can, because some of y'all can't go to India, right? Going to India is difficult. It's expensive. It takes time. And it's also unclear, like, what you'll actually get when you go there, right? Like, you may just go to a place and they'll just teach you how to meditate. They're not going to teach you this kind of stuff. So what we've tried to do, what I've really tried to do is, like, learn all the stuff, right? So I'm a little known fact, I am a trained crystal healer, but I don't do crystal healing and I don't talk about crystal healing and I don't engage in crystal healing because I don't think it's very effective. And so I learned a bunch of stuff. And what I've tried to do, my level best to do, is to try to, like, share with you the stuff that is the most effective and actually works. So that's hopefully what's in the guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff. With your crystals, I'll show you my crystal collection one day. If you guys really, really want to, I will actually show you. I have over 300 crystals as part of my crystal healing collection that all have all these kinds of mystical properties. But we'll see. They've been sitting in a drawer for over a decade. We'll show it to you. Now there's just, so there's no clinical, at least I don't know if I can say no clinical evidence. I have yet to see any kind of convincing clinical evidence that crystal healing helps. So now my crystal healing collection is used to entertain my kids. Because it's a cool collection. I gotta be honest. It looks cool. You know? There's all kinds of quartz. We have rose quartz. We have amethyst. You know. Yeah, but that's not what we teach, right? It's not like we're going to teach you all the stuff that we're very confident is actually helpful. So these are things, the stuff from the guide is going to be a combination of stuff that's scientifically valid, but not everything is scientifically valid in the guide. So a lot of it comes from these like Eastern traditions, like yoga and meditation and things like that. So, but both those are both things that we feel really confident in the tradition of science. We feel really confident in the tradition of meditation. So that's going to be what we kind of focus on. And then the last kind of source for this information is just what's worked for us. So what we teach our coaches, like when they work with clients, like how do they help people understand motivation better, get more motivated? How do we control our attention? How do we restrain attention? Things like that. We're not going to do a Dr. K's guide of how to heal with crystals because I don't believe that you can consistently do that. Y'all are, so do you suggest we get the current guide or wait for the new one? It depends on what you're interested in, Gray Eye 3. So the current guides are for depression, anxiety, and meditation, and the next one is ADHD and doing stuff. So it's like if you're interested in like learning how to meditate and these things, if you guys catch the beginning of the stream, we were talking about like states of consciousness and stuff. If you guys are interested in that stuff, like get the guide to meditation. If you struggle with anxiety and you want to understand, it's not just clinical stuff, but also like, what is the nature of anxiety in the mind? What is anxiety? It's just the ability to predict the future. So how do we understand that? Like from a lay perspective, it doesn't have to be clinical. All human beings are capable of anxiety. All human beings can fall into thought loops. And the guide to depression also talks about things like congruent depression. So that's like kind of my own terminology. But one of the things I discovered as a psychiatrist that was kind of shocking is that people who came in complaining of depression, not all of them had a clinical illness. So we think about major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder, mood disorders as clinical illnesses. These are malfunctions. They're pathology, right? It's not the way the brain is supposed to work. So when someone has major depressive disorder, they have a sense of low self-value that is separated from reality. So you'll have someone who's married and has kids and has a successful career and everyone loves them, but they will think that they're a worthless piece of crap. And I hate to say this, but sometimes people would come into my office and they would say, I'm a worthless piece of crap. And then I'd ask questions like, what do you have going for you? And those people would say nothing. And they really haven't accomplished much in life. They feel like they've fallen behind. They don't really have strong relationships. And so their depression, I know it sounds kind of weird, didn't feel like a break from reality. It actually felt kind of appropriate. Like that this person didn't have purpose. They didn't have a source of joy. And so the interesting thing there is that what I found helps these people is like sometimes you can potentially, they may have a co-occurring medical illness and you can start them on evidence-based treatment. But what I really found helped them was in addition to evaluating them clinically, because then you go through a clinical evaluation. And if they have a clinical disorder, you treat that. But in addition to that, at a minimum, you also help them build a life that's worth living. Right? So if you're depressed because you've got nothing going for you, sometimes that could be a cognitive distortion. You actually do have stuff going for you and you do need treatment. But sometimes that's actually accurate. And the neat thing is, even though it's accurate, that doesn't mean you have to be hopeless. It just means that if you try to treat a non-clinical illness clinically, like if you start that person on an antidepressant medication, I don't know how much it's going to help them. There are even some studies that show that 70% of the therapeutic effect of antidepressant medication is actually placebo. Only 30% of it is pharmacologic. I personally believe that there's more pharmacologic impact than that, and so how do you help someone who's like that? How do you help someone so in the depression guide, we go into a lot of different details about like, if you've fallen behind, how do you deal with that? If you've been raised in a household with conditional love, how do you deal with that? What does conditional love mean? It means that your value as a human being depends on your performance. So whether your parents showed you love and affection depended on your grades, or depended on whether you played the piano, or depended on what you wore. So some people grew up with the sort of sense that like my value as a person depends on what I offer to the rest of the world depends on my performance. And if you grow up believing that about yourself and the idea of intrinsic value is foreign to you, and you start to do poorly in life, then of course you're going to feel bad about yourself. But the cool thing is that that is something that you can work on as well. Like, how do you start to learn compassion towards yourself? How do you start to realize that your value as a human being is intrinsic and is not actually dependent on what you give people? So understanding those kinds of things is in the guide to depression, as well as like sort of explaining some basics around, you know, how do we think about treatment? What's, you know, the role of complementary alternative medicine, like all those kinds of things too. So in terms of which guide you should get, it depends. Like, I would get whichever one or ones you think are relevant to you. And if those are not relevant to you, then we'll make something else at some point, hopefully. Game Puddin's asking, would you be able to get previous guides after the new ones have come out? Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Here is where you can get the guide. So a couple of things. So people who have watched a ton of our streams have said that a lot of the guide is stuff that we talk about in some way, which is sort of the point. The goal is not, the goal is to condense and offer in a comprehensive way from start to finish the distillation of what we try to teach and share. Now, there's going to be some stuff on there that we haven't done on stream or YouTube or things like that. So we tend to go more advanced in the guide as well as more comprehensive, if that kind of makes sense. Because the challenge with stream is that, like, if we teach an advanced topic, like, half the people may not know what we're talking about. So that's why we sort of try to do some of that more advanced stuff in the guide. So we'll have different levels of meditation. So like step 1, do this practice for 2 weeks. Step 2, do this practice for 2 weeks. Step 3, do this practice for 2 weeks. Step 4, okay, this is the final level of the practice. We don't teach the more advanced meditations on stream. Okay? So Autumnbird is saying, I like stream because it is more precise, but the guide is way shorter to watch. Yeah, so we tried to keep it pretty... we try to keep it comprehensive and also succinct. Okay, should we do one more? We've got one more that we got to do, right, chat? Okay. So, next up, how do I transcend my critical inner parents? Hi, I, 20M, am an undergraduate student in a South Asian nation. I live at home with my parents and travel to and from for university. Context, I'm an only child. My parents are overprotective, and they expect me to be with them, take care of them until death does us part. I'm a so-called gifted child. I hate to use the word, but it is relevant, so I have to use it. So not only do they expect an impeccable career, but also an impeccable social life, i.e. marriage to a good household, kids, yada, yada, yada. I'm basically my parents' redemption arc for all the things they couldn't do/accomplish. Problem. I feel burdened by the weight of expectations. Expectations that are not only theirs, but mine as well, because I have been indoctrinated to expect real high from myself. There are these inner parents in me that are very toxic, and since I will be staying home for almost another 3 years until I finish my uni, it seems very difficult to be healthy given my constant exposure to them. A conflict of the acutest nature. Do I become the archetypal good boy, or dare to do what I want to do and be cut off and completely alone? I know the typical answer, bro, there's one life, bro, YOLO, do what you want, bro, yada, 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 yada. I love that. The problem is much deeper than that because my parents are literally inside me, criticizing every wrong step I take, commenting on my every imperfection, downplaying my passion/emotion. I'm basically in a psychological prison guarded by my parents. Anecdote. The other day, my father saw me learning German and he asked me why. I said I wanted to go to Germany for graduate studies. The next day, he comes home and during dinner goes on a lecture about how Germany doesn't have any scope for what I am studying and that I must go to the UK instead. Then he said, better stay in the country and take up a government job. It's got good prestige and you will be with us. Then my mother added emotionally, I can't live without you for 1 second. Therefore, you must succeed in the place where we are planning to spend our old age. What do I do? I like to believe that the sheer acknowledgement of all this shows that I'm in the right path, Dr. K's words. However, acknowledgement and awareness is one thing, which is very important, but practicality is another thing. I want to grow to become a healthy adult who is not afraid to take a stand, to transcend the familial and societal norms, or dare to be in conflict with my parents if that's what is necessary. Basically, I do not want to be my parents' perfect slave forever. It ain't easy being Asian. Now, when I say something like that, a lot of people will say, well, it ain't easy being of my ethnicity. And I don't mean to say that being Asian is harder than any other ethnicity. But these are things that I've struggled with myself. And like, this is a common problem, right? Like culturally, it's like, it makes sense. So let's try to understand this. So the first thing is that oftentimes in particular cultures, we are, as this person beautifully put it, by the way, the person has a talent for words, especially for what I assume is a second, English is a second language, right? Not primary English speaker, but they're have a way with words. So that they are their parents' redemption arc, right? So sometimes in life, our parents place so much on us. The only child. So as they say so beautifully, burdened by the weight of expectations, not only yours, like your own expectations are hard enough to carry, but like you're carrying these other two people's expectations as well. And it's not just expectations that you're carrying, right? You're also their insurance. You're their method of exit. You're their path to comfort. You're the source of their needs, not just financial needs because they're planning on living together, but I can't live without you for 1 second. Therefore, you must succeed in the place where we are planning to spend our old age because they're all relying on you solely for their emotional needs. So you're carrying all of this. You're carrying expectation. You're carrying, all this kind of stuff. And then you internalize it. And this may seem kind of interesting because I'm not hearing that this person's parents are actually as abusive as the inner critical parents. Do y'all get that? Like, so they have critical inner parents, which seem to be a little bit different from the way that their parents actually treat them, which is kind of confusing. So what's going on there? And ultimately, like this person ends up in this conflict where, do I live my own life? Do I follow the typical answer, which is there's one life, bro, live it for yourself. And they can kind of say okay, awareness and acknowledgement is important, but what do I actually do about this, right? I can understand this, and this person's done a good job. They've given us context. They've given us the problem. They've sort of shared an anecdote. They've laid it out so well, but at the end of the day, Dr. K is saying awareness, but I still have to live with these people. I still have to figure out what am I going to do about this? How do I manage these expectations of being a gifted child, of the pressure I put on myself, of the responsibility I have to take care of them? And that's another tricky thing, right? So what am I actually responsible for? Because what this person, the responsibility that they're being given may be different from what they actually feel. I can't live without you for a second, his mother says. So, does that mean that this person is responsible for being with their mom every second? Is this person solely responsible for their mother's happiness and contentment? There's a lot going on here. And how do we think through it? So the first thing that we're going to talk about are the inner critical parents. So it may seem kind of weird, but the voice of our parents that we internalize can be one of two things. It can either be the actual voice of our parents, so we sort of learn our self-dialogue from what we are explicitly told. We're conditioned to say these things to ourselves, and then we start saying them to ourselves. But usually, when I think about inner self-dialogue that comes directly from conditioning, usually the source of the conditioning is a little bit more distant. I don't know if that makes sense, but if I grow up in an abusive household, let's say, and I leave at the age of 21, the voice that I carry with me outside of that household is that old voice. I carry it with me, and it's sort of the same. What can happen actually, especially in these kinds of households, is when I'm actually still with the people, the inner critical voice is actually what your parents don't say. It's what's left unsaid that you fill in the gaps. I know it sounds kind of weird, right? But your parents may not be quite as harsh with you as you are with yourself. So you sort of interpret and you kind of read between the lines, and your mom will never say, "You're a terrible son for leaving me emotionally alone." What she'll do is make these emotionally manipulative statements that then manifest within you as like an internally harsh voice. How dare you? Right? It's kind of like, if you guys know basketball, it's sort of like the layup, where like everything gets set up by your parents, and that final part of the inner critical voice is actually the part that they don't say that you fill in the gaps. You finish it off. You cross the T's and dot the I's. Do y'all get that? So it's the stuff that your parents don't actually say. And that's why it's the nastiest stuff of all. Right? And so it's kind of interesting because like it's not actually what they've conditioned you, in a weird way, it's sort of what they've conditioned you to think, but it's not direct. So I think that this is where like sometimes the self-dialogue that we have is like directly conditioned from what we are told in directly abusive situations. But what we tend to find is that in non-directly abusive situations and in manipulative situations, the harshest critic is actually your internal voice. Because your parents would never go quite that far, or they do so rarely. And then you kind of fill in the gaps and you kind of carry it with you. Now, this makes it very, very difficult to deal with, because if someone says something to you, there's at least the possibility of some kind of response or conversation, or no, screw you, or let's talk about it, let's patch things up. The reason that this kind of inner critical voice is so devastating is because nothing is actually said like this. So there's no chance for like argument. There's no chance for apology. There's no chance for resolution. So you're kind of stuck with this thing that like feels impervious, right? Because if your parents actually said this stuff to you, then it would be clear that they're mistreating you. It would be clear that it's abusive. And if it's abusive, then you can fight back. You can say, screw you, you're abusive. I'm gonna go live my own life. But they don't say that. What do they say instead? I can't live for a second. Are beta, I cannot live for 1 second without you. How are you arguing against it? What are you like? Is that abusive? Are beta, I don't know. You can't, if you go to Germany, I don't know. I cannot live for 1 second without you. You're my baby boy. You are my one child. I've given my whole life for you. I'm making chapatis until 2 in the morning. I'm making everything. I love you so much. You are so perfect. You are so smart and so beautiful. And you're going to have kids one day and it's going to be beautiful. We'll all live together and we'll be happy. And I love you so much. I cannot bear to be without you for 1 moment. That's not what the inner critical parent says. That's what the parent actually says, right? We love you so much. They're looking out for you. They have the best of intentions. And so then, like, it makes you feel bad, right? You feel guilty. Because you're like, My parents have given so much for me. I'm their only hope. I'm their redemption arc. And then you feel guilty. And then what happens is like something subtle happens, okay? So stay with me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain this, but as you feel guilty, you get angry at them. Because you're like, they're not letting me live my life, right? Because the advice is you only have one life, bro. You got to live it. But I want to go to Germany. Like I'm studying German. Like I want to go to Germany. I don't want to go to the UK. I don't want a government job. I don't want those things. And they want those things for you. And then if you get angry at them, if you start to feel guilty, if you start to push back, that's where the fuel for the inner critical voice comes in. Look at how ungrateful you are, you piece of crap. How could you not make your parents happy? They're your only chance. They've sacrificed so much. What the hell is wrong with you, you stupid kid? How dare you? The fuel for the inner critical voice. And it's so much more harsh than your parents actually are. Y'all get that? So oftentimes, our parents will position us, they'll manipulate us, they'll like scoot us, right? It's kind of like you're playing a game of chess where like they put your king in check and then you have to move and then they move it again, check. You move again, check, check. And you're moving, they're pushing you into a corner, and you can't fight back against it because your king is threatening you, just have to move it. We love you so much, but Arre beta, we love you. You're so smart. All this positivity that's closing off your future one door at a time. And you feel yourself getting pushed into the corner. And then you get angry with them because like, what is this crap? And then you beat yourself up because you're not allowed to be angry with them. How dare you be angry with them? What the hell is wrong with you? Inner critical voice spawns. Because the truth is you were raised probably in a society where like there's a different set of values. So let's talk about that for a second. So here in the West, we think that the individual surpasses the group. Independence matters most. Freedom, choice. Other people don't get to tell me what to do. Right? That's what we believe. It's your life. You only get one. You should live it for your benefit. That's oftentimes what it is. The individual matters more than the group. And that's where this is kind of challenging because there's sort of like a culture clash here. Because in the culture that I grew up in, to a certain degree, like I'm always hesitant to generalize because obviously there's a bunch of, you can't sort of stereotype, but at the same time, there are like shared cultural phenomenon, which have been scientifically studied and validated and stuff like that. Right? So perceptions of mental health, perceptions of independence, perceptions of values of community over independence. Because your parents are coming from a generation, because for like the last 500 years in India, or I don't know if you're from India, it could be Pakistan or any other South Asian nation, right? Bangladesh, who knows? Sri Lanka. But for these cultures, like the family unit is paramount. So you do what needs to be done for the sake of the family. And so it's like really challenging because like, what are your parents going to do if you leave? Like, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to be independent. Like, that's just not something that they've ever learned. So this is where I think the person makes a good point that like awareness acknowledgement is great, but like what am I actually going to do with my parents? Like what am I going to do with them if I leave? Like how are they going to what are they going to do all day? Right? And this is where I'd love to say like it should start with a conversation, but I think that's going to be hard. But it is very challenging. Like the situation that you're in doesn't have an easy answer. Because what's going to happen is in order for you to like you're going to have to rip yourself to a certain degree from the family for your own independence. And that's going to be traumatic for them. And this is the kind of situation where there isn't, I do think that there's like a peaceful resolution here, but it isn't pretty and it isn't easy. So I think that this is where this is the challenge of like South Asian kids or East Asian kids. Or, even kids from Mexico, as I learned recently. Right? These are not just, these are sort of like Asian stereotypes, but apply to people from Nigeria and like even like several Caucasian nations. struggle with this. So if it applies to you, fantastic. I mean, sucks for you, but we're going to try to help you. Right? We're like, how do you explain to your parents like what's going on? Like, how do you understand this? So the first is, I think you should understand that, you know, they are placing unrealistic expectations on you. And I think having a conversation around that is very important. So it's kind of talking to them, like just asking like open-ended questions about, you know, so I'm thinking that you guys are assuming that we're going to have a joint family, and you may not even be able to say that. Like they may like tear your head off, right? Because I was lucky enough at least to grow up in the U.S. where like some people of my generation live in joint families and like some people don't. So if the joint family thing is not really doable, you can sort of talk to them a little bit about, you know, you talk about, so I'd start with something simple like prestige. So when your dad says you should get a good government job because it has good prestige. And so you should ask them, you know, what is the value of prestige? Help me understand like why prestige is a good thing. You know, just like start to ask questions. And this is where, like, I think for a lot of people, like, asking questions is the best way to sort of get them to question their beliefs. Just trying to understand. So Dad explained to me, like, help me understand, like, how, you know, if I had one job that paid twice as much and had less prestige, and I had another job that paid, you know, half as much but had good prestige, which one would you advise that I take? This is also good because what you should do is, like, toss in money, because chances are that's going to be an important variable as well, right? And just listen to what your dad has to say. Try to understand it. Try to learn it, because they have a good perspective. And if your mom says, you know, I don't know what I would do without you, and that's where you can say, like, yeah, it sounds like, you know, you really want to be close to me. I'm kind of curious because, you know, I don't know. I mean, because getting a job with good prestige, like getting a job like outside of this country, like going to the UK, you may not be able to come with me right away. There may be time that I'm farther apart from you. That may be a reality. So this is where I know it's kind of sneaky, but what I would really recommend is like, because at the end of the day, like y'all may need some practical advice, right? How to deal with parents. So what I would do is use their values against their values. So point out to them that you may have to leave, right? So like, there are the values, like going to the UK. He's going to UK. He's going to US to do masters. Very nice. Right? So like use money, use prestige, use leaving your country. Use it. Use all of it. Put them all against each other and see what floats to the top. So you can say, yeah, like what if I do graduate school in the UK like Dad is suggesting? What are you going to do? Like we better start thinking about that, right? Because I love you and I care about you. But what are you saying? And then if you really want to, you can even go next level. You know, like, I don't actually recommend this, but so many years ago, I had a teacher when I was training in psychiatry who gave me a really interesting piece of feedback. And she said, Alok, use your power for good, not evil. And I kind of laughed, but I realized that it was actually very authentic feedback, because here's what the evil me would do. Oh, Mom, I'll never leave you. I don't need to go to the UK. I don't even need to go to graduate school. The most important thing is family. And I'll just get a simple government job. It may not make very much money. I may not be able to get a very prestigious marriage, but I'll stay here with you because that's the most important thing. Right? I don't actually think you should do that. But if you want to play, because like that's the emotional manipulation. Like I grew up in these households where this kind of crap happened. Because here's the thing, like Asian parents, you know what their trump card is? Their trump card, y'all want some knowledge here? Their trump card is the crucifix card. They love the crucifix card. This is I've sacrificed everything for you. I'm suffering so much, all for your sake. Oh my God. The crucifix card. Mom, I want to go to the UK and learn things and go have I want to go have fun. Crucifix. And then like the crucifix card fuels the guilt, it fuels the anger, it fuels the frustration with yourself. I gave birth to you. It was so painful. Thank you very much. Sure, Warlock. So what you can do is you could play the crucifix card. No, no, no. I would never leave the country. I couldn't do that. Martyr complex. Well said. Right? So you can, I mean, I don't think you should, because I think that just like if you want to go toe to toe with the crucifix card, you got to be careful, because chances are they've been playing it longer than you have and know how to use it better than you do. And I don't think emotional manipulation, it can succeed, but I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it leads you in the right direction. Right? So that's where like I would start by just having conversations with them and really ask them for all the values that they this is kind of weird, but like the reason that it's really hard is because you have a bunch of values. They're imposing all the values on you. And then you feel like you have to live up to these 16 different expectations, which is impossible to live up to. Right? That's why it's so paralyzing, because it's like, I got to be professionally successful. I got to get a job with prestige. I got to have a joint family. I got to be mama's boy for the rest of my life. You know? Like at some point I want to stop wearing diapers, but then what is my mom going to do? How is she going to feel like she's worth something in this world? So instead of trying to live up to those 1,000 different expectations, start putting them against each other. Respectfully with your parents. What's more important? I'm being pulled in 1,000 different directions. Which one should I pick? And hopefully through that conversation, a couple of things will happen. The first is that your parents will sort of recognize that like, you can't do it all. And then if they stop thinking that you can do it all, then hopefully you will start realizing that you can't do it all, nor that you need to do it all. There's a priority list. The problem with expectations from Asian parents is that they don't give you priorities. They just give you checkboxes, and it's all of the above. Right? There's not, like, you don't get to not do something for the sake of something else. You don't get to choose between math and piano. You got to do them both. You can choose between piano and violin, but you don't get to choose between a 4.0 GPA and other things. Like, no, it's like all of the above, all the time. You're our emotional support. You're our financial support. You're our hopes. You're our dreams. You're our redemption arc. You're our insurance. You're everything to us. Because we have sacrificed everything for you. Right? And so I don't know that they can handle the questions that really need to be asked. Like, you know, here's the wild thing. Do you wish your life was different? What did you have to sacrifice to get here? Right? Like, they're not going to be able to handle this kind of question. It takes many, many years of therapy to get Indian parents to get to this place. But there may have been some sacrifices for the sake of your kids that weren't worth it. They're not going to be ready for that for years. Right? It's kind of tricky. It's always worth it. So I'd start with like priorities. And then there's also some stuff about like limit setting and things like that, which I don't think that it's going to be easy for you to implement. But I would start with priorities. I think that's where like that's like the best way to start conversations with Asian parents. It's not nearly enough, but sort of asking them, okay, what's more important? When you say that going to Germany like doesn't have good options for my field, where do you get that idea? Well, chances are they're going to say that because someone in their social circle believes that. That's going to be the answer. I doubt they've actually done the research. Well, so-and-so's son went to UK and he has a very good job now. That's why. Okay. So what you're telling me is based on the experience of one person, you're telling me that I should not go to Germany. Don't argue with them. Just make sure you understand what they're saying. No, but everyone goes to UK. UK, you will be better. It will be better. I can tell you. Lots of good opportunity in UK. How much do you understand about the opportunity in Germany? There's not much. How do you know that? Well, we don't know anyone who's gone to Germany. Oh, I see. So because we don't know anyone who's done it, that means that there's nothing worth it there. Right? Just clarify for them. And then chances are what they'll do is they'll try to like, I don't know how to say this. They'll try to squeeze out of it. They're going to be slippery. They're like, okay, fine. You can go to Germany if you want. I didn't say, I mean, I know I talked earlier about wanting to go to Germany. I'm not saying that I'm going to Germany. I'm just wondering how you understand what the opportunity in Germany is. No, go, fine. You want to go? Go. Do what you want. I'm confused. Like, you seem upset. Did I say something wrong? I'm just trying to understand, because you seem very confident that I should go to the UK and Germany. I'm just trying to understand how. I'd like to learn from you, Papa. Play that I'd like to learn from you card. Because sometimes if you ask questions, they don't have a leg to stand on, they're going to get upset. Okay? That's more Sith Lord Dr. K version. Like, that's enough to get you started. I think we should, maybe we do Dr. K's guide to talking to Asian parents. But like, they're going to like respond emotionally, right? So you're going to like calm down. You're not going to take the bait. You're going to be like, oh, I was just trying to understand. It seems like my questions are upsetting you. I just wanted to learn why the UK was better than Germany. And what I'm hearing is that we know a lot of people who have gone to the UK and we don't know many people who've gone to Germany. That's okay, right? Doesn't mean that we're not settling on UK and we're not settling on Germany, but you have sort of opened the door a little bit in the conversation. There was kind of like this very, very like unfortunate concession of, okay, fine, you go to Germany. We're not going to take that bait, but we're glad it was offered, even though it's like a bitter, it's like a poison pill. It's like, go ahead, eat your piece of cake. It's laced with cyanide. So you don't want to take it, right? You want to be respectful and be like, oh, no, that's fine. You know, so like start conversations, talk about priorities, ask questions. You're 20 years old. You know, you're going to have a couple years before you can cut the umbilical cord. You don't need to do it when you're 20. You've got 3 years, right? You're still in university. So start the conversations today. Keep having them. And over time, hopefully what'll happen is they'll start to respect you. They'll start to respect your way of thinking. And then you can start to ask them questions, right? You can start to ask them questions about like what you should do and like frame them options. There's subtle things that you can do. And that's when your mom will be. So you can say like, Mom, I'm thinking about, you know, applying to graduate school in the UK because Dad told me to, and also in Germany. But I'm trying to figure out like, are you going to be okay if I go study abroad? How are we going to handle that? Like, what are we going to do about that? And so you can approach things from a problem-solving aspect, where as long as you kind of like acknowledge their values, you can still like move the life in the way that you want to. And at some point, you may actually have to like say no to things. But I think that this is there are a couple of advantages about Asian culture, which is that Asian culture is conflict avoidant and face saving. So as long as you give people an out and you give them like the opportunity to play the crucifix card, like you can navigate it. It's doable. And what do I mean by that? Oh, Mom, it's going to be so hard for you if I go to the UK. You know, I know you've given your entire life and then like you're not even going to be able to see me for like 6 months at a stretch. That's going to be so difficult. Like, how are you going to survive? Here's a crucifix card. Take it. Play it. Oh, beta, it's going to be so hard. I know, Mom. Thank you so much for your sacrifice. I love you so much. You guys got it? Does that make sense? So it's doable. Now, the biggest challenge, which we've got to say, is that I'm having a conversation with a fictitious person, right? I'm playing chess against myself. So I can show you whatever brilliant maneuvers I want to. The parents that you're talking to may not be as compliant as the fictitious ones I make up. right? And at the same time, as Scald Glacier is saying, it's so weird how Asian parents act the same. So I'm telling you guys, I think this can work. Like, it's doable. You gotta just like take it slow. Use things like priorities. If they want to play the crucifix card, let them play it. Give it to them. Let them play it for your sake, right? And then you acknowledge their sacrifice and you express appreciation. And then when you come from the UK or Germany or whatever, you bring whatever prestige, whatever plus 10 to prestige handbag you want to, because hopefully you're going to be in a financial position where you can bring back gifts. And not only because you're a smart person, what you're going to do is not only bring back gifts for your parents, you're going to bring back gifts for your parents' friends, for whom social status and prestige is very important, so that when you go to the UK, like, your parents will be able to like show off, right? And they're like, oh, like, my beautiful beta he brought you a purse as well. It's not as big as the one he brought me, but he brought you something. And it's better than your stupid kid is going to get you. Right? So like, you can navigate it. Right? Y'all get me? African parents moment? So I've heard this from my friends who are Nigerian as well. I just don't have too many friends from too many different parts of Africa. Like, Nigeria and South Africa are the two places, but... Right? And this is where, like, Scallon is saying, like, this is how you got to play the game. So here's the thing. Like, I hate to say this, but, like this person says, like, acknowledgement and awareness is one thing, but practicality is another. Okay? And that's the truth of it. And this is where, like, when we're talking about social interactions, like, we can teach y'all how to have a conversation, but sometimes, like, you got to learn this stuff. Like, this is the kind of crap that we teach to people who are executives at companies. Right? There's a lot of this, like, stuff that you have to understand about human behavior. It's the way that it is. And you can try to have super challenging conversations. You can go YOLO. You can say, no, this is my life. I'm going to do what I want to. And you may feel fine doing that. Like, a lot of people will cheer you on. You live your life. Forget about everyone else. Like, set your boundaries. Like, enforce them harshly, and everyone else can go fuck themselves. That's not how... I don't think that can be healthy up to a point. So you can set boundaries, but you've got these tools at your disposal as well. So this is where, like, understand, your parents' value system, understand what matters to them, understand how to have conversations with them. You don't want to be defiant. You don't want to be rebellious, because then they'll pull out the big guns and they'll kind of like put you in your place, and the emotional blackmail will go through the roof and you'll crumble. And then you'll be like, it'll be this toxic, resentful kind of relationship. But honestly, there are ways to navigate this where you are happy and they are happy. Like, there are ways to do it. This is all theoretical, because I've never met your parents. I've never met you. I have no idea, like, what of this stuff will actually work, because I don't know. But I do think that, like, considering these things, like, it's not about, I can't tell you sitting here on the internet what's going to work for you. But what I can do is show you a couple of chess openings. Right? And then you can take these chess openings and you can decide, okay, like, which of these is going to work the best for me. The least we can do is equip you with understanding of why your inner critical voice is so bad. And that if you want to deal with your inner critical voice, what you need to look at is your feelings of guilt and anger at yourself for not wanting to be what your parents want you to be. You may need to rewind and watch that sentence again, or listen to that sentence. Right? Because it was quite a mouthful, but... Right? Because you feel guilty and angry because you don't want to be what they want you to be. And then you feel guilty for not wanting to be that because they've given up so much for you. And then that emotion is the fuel for the criticism, because how dare you? And so there's a whole internal component which we can talk about. But at the end of the day, your parents are human beings that you're going to have to set limits with. You're going to have conversations with. So we'd like to at least equip you with a couple of openings. And also, I can guarantee you that the conversations are not going to go the way that they did here today, with me talking to myself and my fictitious parent. But one thing that I can say is that I've worked with a lot of people from South Asian, East Asian, African, less so Latino, but a couple households, people who have to set expectations with their family members. And it does work. Like, you'll find a way. right? Like, keep at it. Don't give up hope. Believe in yourself. Questions? Samosa Person says this feels too real. I know. And what a perfect name, Samosa Person. Gee, I wonder where you're from. Amir H12, how are parents' expectations even justified considering you didn't even ask to be born? So I hate to say something that may seem a little harsh, but expectations don't have to be justified. The truth is they place them on you. You've got to deal with them either way, right? Like, I have no idea what's justified or what isn't, but what I can tell you is that people do all kinds of crap that isn't justified. You still live in the world where you have to deal with unjustified crap. And it's incredibly frustrating when people put you in places that are not fair. Like, that sucks. And you still have to deal with it. So I'd like, aside from some amount of understandable resentment and frustration, the justification, they don't care about the lack of justification, right? They may have various justifications, like there are arguments to be made, but I don't find that those arguments tend to hold a whole lot of water, right? Because you're always saying you didn't even ask to be born. Well, neither did they. That's just the way of things. So it's tough. But I don't know that the expectations are justified, but they can still be placed on you, and you still have to deal with them. Cubita goes to saying, my parents are Cuban and sacrificed their upper class life to come here when I was young. I was gifted a 4.0 student going to JHU. I've been learning these techniques for the past few years, and it's been rough. It is rough, right? And that's where hopefully what you can do is acknowledge their sacrifice and at the same time recognize, because this is the really hard thing, their sacrifice does not necessitate your obedience. But their sacrifice should absolutely be honored, and you should express gratitude. That's what's so tricky here, is that your mom can sacrifice for you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to live life her way, but you should absolutely credit her for that, right? And even to a certain degree, if she sacrificed a lot for you, I personally think that, my parents' emotional needs are my responsibility. I feel responsible for that. And so even if it causes me some amount of discomfort or unhappiness or whatever, I try to take care of my parents because I know they take care of me. And that's what a reciprocal relationship is like. The problem is that when we have debt, when we are indebted to our parents, there's an assumption that there's only one way to pay back that debt. Oh, since I sacrificed so much for you, we're going to be a joint family. We're going to live with you. It's going to be great. We're going to do this. We're going to map out your entire life, and we need you to live it. And if you don't live up to all of these 15 things, that means you are not expressing gratitude. I disagree with that. That's where there's option C. There's some amount of compromise. You can express gratitude. That's where the bags come in, right? You can do a lot for your parents expressing their gratitude, not setting firm boundaries not set harsh boundaries, I should say. It's okay to set firm boundaries, but not defaulting to boundary setting, because there's an emotional component here. You can express love and affection for your parents, and you can, and at the same time, tell them, hey, I'm not comfortable doing everything that you're asking me to. And even at some point, this is a late stage question. They're not going to be able to handle this for the first couple of years, but is it possible for, me to pay back that debt in a way that is not obedience? Is obedience the only way to pay back a debt? And that's where, if you can ever have that conversation with your parents, it could be very productive. Because that's the assumption, is because we did all of this stuff for you, you have to do all of this stuff for us. Whereas, there's wiggle room there, right? Fluorescent Pickle says, you were talking like I should care about their expectations in the first place. What stops me from just walking away from them? Nothing. So this is where, I have a presumption that maintaining a relationship is important to you. So the advice that I'm kind of giving, if advice is what you call it, is I'm not hearing from the post, so even the poster sort of says, So I'm kind of operating on these assumptions. I know the typical answer is, bro, there's one life, YOLO, do what you want, yada, yada, yada. But you can even look at the sarcastic tone of this. What this tells me is that this is not an acceptable course of action for this person at this time. Right? This person isn't saying, I do not want to be my parents' perfect slave forever, but they're not saying, how do I cut off all contact with parents? The presumption I'm getting from this post is that they want to maintain a relationship. So if you don't want to maintain a relationship, that's totally fine. You can just walk away. You don't have to F them and their expectations. But I think for a lot of people out there, they want to find a way to navigate the relationship without torpedoing it. And I'm all for firm boundary setting. We've even taught about how to set boundaries. Like, it's very important to do that. But I also think that, like, if relationships are important towards you, there are ways to navigate it. It's not nuclear option is the only button. If you want to walk away by all means. If that's emotionally the right thing for you, like, go for it. But if you don't want to walk away and you want to figure out some way to maintain some kind of relationship, that's an option too. It just requires more work. So how do you argue STEM versus liberal arts degrees to critical parents? I talk to a lot of kids who love liberal arts, but the push for STEM degrees is life-threatening for them. Yeah, that's tough, man. I've had a couple of... Let me think about that one for a second, and then we'll meditate. I think it requires a lot of listening. So this is where, I think the argument happens way later than what a lot of people would think. And what do I mean by that? That means that, like, in the cases where I've had those kinds of conversations and even helped people have those kinds of conversations, it starts with, like, questions about, like, okay, if I major in liberal arts, like, what do you imagine my career path will be like? If I major in a STEM degree, what do you imagine my career path will be like? And just ask them to lay everything out. And then, like, it starts with, like, super high level questions. Like, is it okay to major in something that makes less money? It's not about argument at the beginning. It's about really mapping out all of their beliefs. And then what you eventually kind of want to go to is choices and priorities, right? So this is where, like if you say, okay, like, if you're a software developer, you're going to make 100K. If you're a government major, you're going to make like 38,000. And so, like, asking your parents questions like, so kind of conceding the point that, like, I'll make more money if I'm a developer, but what do you think about, like, things like job satisfaction? Does that matter at all to you? Are you calculating that at all? Like, it's like those kinds of questions. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, you may want to major in liberal arts, but it's also, like, not a bad idea to, like, seriously consider what your parents are saying. Because I've also worked with my fair share of people who wished, in retrospect, they did not have a degree that had very few, like, substantial job opportunities because they're really struggling now. And oftentimes what it kind of comes down to is you have these kinds of conversations. It's sort of like, sometimes it involves compromises. So it's like, okay, I'm going to take, like, economics classes and I'm going to take computer science classes. They both involve, like, mathematics, and, like, I understand what y'all are saying. I get it. So I'm going to take these 6 classes, and can we, like, talk again after, in a year and a half? And so sometimes it involves doing those kinds of things, and you kind of telling them, okay, like, I absolutely hate these classes, or these classes aren't that bad, but I really love this. What do you think about that? And this is also where, if your parents are concerned about money and, like, getting a liberal arts degree, like, it may be worthwhile for you to actually spend a little bit of time really thinking about your career before you just jump into a major without understanding what's going to happen after you graduate. Because I mean, I've seen that, like I said, some where people are like, you know, they graduate with a degree in English literature, and some of them do fine. Some of them go to med school, and not that that's the only way to be fine. Some of them enter publishing and they're very happy. Some of them, you know, do creative writing workshops and are really focused on becoming successful authors. And some of them are just floundering. We're hoping to be professors and are like enter PhD programs where they're taken advantage of by their mentors because they're looking for free, cheap labor and they don't actually want to graduate you on time. I've seen the whole spectrum. So I think it's like, have conversations. And this is where a lot of times, you know, we just assume that, oh, we should study whatever we want to. Like, I don't know if that's actually the case. I think you should think about the practicalities of what you're studying and what you're planning on doing with it. And also understand what the actual like probabilities are. So I've also had these kinds of conversations with kids who want to go into want to do esports. Well, I have like 15-year-olds who are like trying to convince their parents, I don't want to study for my classes. I want to play this game all day because I'm going to go pro. And then what we'll do is we'll put together some kind of like proposal, right? What's the likelihood that you'll go pro? How much money are you going to make? And we'll look at all that stuff. And then you have a conversation about it. And oftentimes, you'll be surprised, about half the kids that I end up doing that sort of work with decide of their own that they don't want to go pro when they actually look at the statistics. Yeah, so late GG is saying, I've seen so many successful, very high GPA students in STEM go into very unethical professions that harm other people in the environment. I've also seen a lot of people who are low GPA students not in STEM that have done the same, right? Bug Papaya is asking, are you actually good? I don't know. I try to be, but that's for y'all to decide. All right, should we meditate? Let's do it. Okay, so what we're going to do today is teach y'all one Pratyahara meditation. So we're going to have a bunch of these. We've got about 13 of them sketched out for the guide to ADHD and doing stuff. But we're going to introduce sort of the concept today. So Pratyahara is the fifth step of something called Raja Yoga. So Raja Yoga is what's called the King's Path or the Eightfold Path. It involves 8 steps of essentially meditative practice. Step 5 is Pratyahara or sensory withdrawal. And the idea behind Pratyahara is that most of the thoughts in our mind originally from the sense organs. And that a lot of our inability to control our mind is actually rooted in the senses. So for example, let's say that I go to school and someone bullies me during recess and they call me a couple of nasty things for like 5 minutes. And then what happens is after hearing these words, a thought process triggers in my mind and the rest of my day is ruined because I'm just like thinking about getting bullied and I'm in an angry headspace and all this kind of stuff. This mind sort of has this autopilot. But if you really look at where's the origin of that autopilot, it's actually from a sensory experience. Another simple way to think about this is that, you know, if you're hungry and you're walking down the street and you smell something cooking, you may want to eat that thing. So our desires also come from our sense organs. This is something that is very well known if you look at like advertising, right? Why do people advertise? Because if they can engage your senses, they will alter your behavior. That's the whole point behind advertising. And this is also where they're very crafty with how they put together ads, right? If you listen to advertisements, the volume tends to be higher than whatever else you're like watching. And so that's a trick to engage your sensory organs. Colors and things like that will be very, very vivid and everyone will be having a good time. So it's all like a sensory approach to shaping your behavior. Now, this is very well understood in advertising, but the interesting thing about Pratyahara is that the yogis actually figured this out thousands of years ago, but they weren't trying to change anyone else's behavior. They were just trying to control their own. So by understanding and controlling your senses, you can alter your thoughts, your motivation, and your behavior. So we're going to teach you all a very simple introductory Pratyahara practice. This practice can be done, you can do it for about, let's say we're going to do it for about 5 minutes today. You can include it with other kinds of practices like alternate nostril breathing or things like that. I would sort of use this as kind of like a middle practice. So you can start with a Shuddhi practice like alternate nostril breathing, do this in the middle, and then if you have some kind of deeper, mystical, esoteric, or mantra-related practice, I'd do that at the end, or an inquisitive practice. So like any kind of like mantra or sankalpa, you should kind of do at the end, okay? So the goal of Pratyahara is to prime your mind for kind of a different kind of meditative practice. So what we're going to do in this practice is literally withdraw our awareness of sensation into ourselves. And what I mean by that is we're going to start by being aware of our fingertips, and then we'll be aware of our palms, and then we're going to sort of like put our attention to the most peripheral parts of our body. And then we're going to serially move closer and closer and closer and closer and closer until our attention is focused here. This whole process will take about 5 minutes. And the goal here is going to be that we're going to be training our mind to focus on what we tell it to. So it's sort of like, it's like training a dog to sit when you tell it to stand when you tell it to fetch when you tell it to. Because a lot of times we don't really realize that our mind is controlling us as opposed to the other way around, right? It's like a dog on a leash that's dragging its owner as opposed to the owner controlling the dog. All right? So what we're going to do is sit up straight. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my palms face up, kind of across my knees. Okay? So y'all may have seen like a more, traditional meditative posture where someone's like out like this or they're doing this or whatever. So we're going to do palms face up. And your back should be straight. Neck should be straight. Eyes closed. Take a few moments to just breathe. And now what I want you to do is notice the tips of your fingers. Put your attention one at a time on your thumbs. And just feel the thumb. You may notice some tension there, so relax it. And then go to your index fingers. You can even focus on one finger at a time. And then your middle finger. Ring finger. Pinky. And just feel them. And now I want you to move to the base of the fingers. Feel the outermost edge of your palm, where your fingers and your palms join together. Concentrate on that part. And now move to the palm. Feel the palm. You may start to notice some degree of discomfort as you zero in on a body part and it doesn't move. And now slowly let your awareness slide up your forearm. Bring it through the wrist, up the arm, and into the elbow. If you need to, you can move your arms, wiggle them a little bit. And then up the elbow into your biceps. And then into the shoulders. It's okay to feel that discomfort. And then into the chest, your clavicles, the joint between your arms and your torso. And now into the rib cages. As you breathe in, notice each and every one of your ribs expanding, pulling apart, stretching. Then sinking back together as you exhale. And now I want you to move beyond the rib cages towards the center of your being. And you'll feel at the core of yourself one segment that does not move when you breathe. That you have sensations of the fingertips, the palms, the forearms, the elbows, the shoulders, even the rib cages. But in the very center of your being is a place that is almost absent of any sensation. And now what I want you to do is relax into it. Let go of the tension in your shoulders, your arms. Feel the void within you. And like a river emptying into the ocean, all of the sensations of your body can be traced back and empty into this place. And as you breathe in and out slowly, notice the relaxation. Now put your palms together in front of you in Namaste position and rub them together. Rub, 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 rub. Feel the friction. Cup them over your eyes. Take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, slowly open your eyes. Let your palms come down. So this is a weird meditation because sometimes the first part of this meditation actually makes people feel very uncomfortable. So I know that I certainly felt a lot of restlessness, a lot of tension. I feel like I got to move my arms and legs. And then as we pull into ourselves, as we sort of let ourselves relax, we feel some relief from the tension. And so this is the key thing about this technique. As you learn this technique, you will begin to realize that within you is a void that can suck in whatever you need it to. So whether it's any kind of discomfort or desire, just let it slide into you and just let it go into the void. It need not control you. And so oddly enough, even if you felt some degree of discomfort, you can let it go into the void. And as you become adept at this, you can let whatever, you can take out the trash whenever you need to. If there's a thought that you don't want to engage in, let it slip into that. If there's a behavior that you don't want to engage in, let it sink into the void. Whatsoever you dislike, you can put into there. And hopefully, it'll give you some sense of control. So Bulal is saying sounds like suppressing emotions. It sounds like suppressing emotions, but it isn't actually suppressing them. It's quite the opposite. It's letting go of them. So a suppression is a pushing it down, not a letting flow. Suppression is a restraint. Very different. What if you dump everything into the void, Money Apple asks? That's a very good question. Why don't you try for a few minutes and find out? Even the good things? Sure. Experiment. See what happens. F-Stab is asking, what if I forget who I am? I don't know. Something tells me we don't need to worry too much about that, but yeah, so this is a trickier practice for sure. I don't know that it's a great practice for beginners, and some people may have difficulty with it, which is totally fine. If it works for you, it works for you. If it doesn't, you can try it a couple times, then you may decide that you don't like it. Paradoxically, if you go to other practices, you may now appreciate them a lot more, right? So give it a shot. Who are we rating today? Miniweez is asking about thoughts on oxytocin nasal spray. So last time I looked at the studies, it didn't really seem to do much. But it's been a while since I looked at the studies on oxytocin nasal spray and if it's gotten better. So I'd be curious. Hello.
Are you still streaming?
Yes.
Oh.
I'm done though. Okay. What is this? Okay. Looks like Dry Bear is playing Lost Ark. Y'all want to do that? Ozerai, thank you for the gifted subs. Thank y'all very much for the subs and donations and stuff. So just a reminder, we will be out the rest of the week for filming of our super secret project, which is Dr. K's Guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff, which is the epic name that we came up with. And we can go, let's go raid Dry Bear. Adios.